Imagine waking into a world where the dark is never truly empty, where every riverbank, every patch of grass, every silence in the trees might mean death is close. Early humans did not fear the world because they were weak. They feared it because they learned, slowly and painfully, that survival depended on reading every sign before it was too late. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications if this is the kind of ancient mystery and deep human history you enjoy. Because tonight, we step back to the moment humans first understood that the world was not safe. The world is still dark when they wake, and for a few moments it belongs to sound alone. Wind moves through dry grass with a low, restless hiss. Somewhere beyond the edge of the camp, hooves strike the earth in a loose rhythm, then fade. A child turns in sleep. Ash breathes softly in the fire pit, not dead yet, only waiting. Around it, bodies uncurl from the ground one by one, wrapped in hide, stiff with cold, already listening before they fully open their eyes. Nothing here is safe in the way later humans will mean the word. There are no walls, no doors, no locks, no maps, no certainty that food will be found before dark or that everyone now breathing will still be alive by the next moon. And yet for a very long time, the world does not feel broken to them. It feels legible. That may be the most important difference. Danger exists everywhere, but it usually has a shape. It leaves tracks in mud, bends grass in a certain direction, hangs in the sharp smell of dung or blood, moves in a familiar season, comes with teeth that can be counted and habits that can be learned. A river floods, but mostly in the same places. Herds move, but not without signs. Great cats hunt, but not without cover. Snakes coil where stone holds the day's heat. The world is harsh. But harshness is not the same thing as chaos. What survives in the record suggests that for hundreds of thousands of years, early humans and their ancestors lived not in comfort, but in a tense working relationship with the land. They are vulnerable, certainly. They are often hungry. They die young by later standards. But they're not helpless passengers drifting through a nightmare. They are observant primates with extraordinary patience, excellent memory, and a growing ability to turn pattern into advantage. At first glance, prehistoric life is often imagined as nothing but panic punctuated by hunting. That picture is too simple. Most hours are made of smaller decisions. Which slope warms first after night cold? Which berries stain the fingers but do not sicken the stomach? How long vultures circle before descending? How far one can follow a herd before spending more strength than the meat is worth? Which old woman remembers the bitter roots that become edible after soaking? Which rock face breaks the wind? Which tree line hides cats? Which water tastes stale? Which silence means nothing? And which silence means something has just stopped the world around you from making noise? This is knowledge built without writing, without measured science, without formal instruction as later societies will understand it. But it is knowledge all the same. It lives in the body. It lives in the feet that know where the ground dips in darkness. It lives in fingers that can read a flint edge as easily as later fingers read ink on paper. It lives in the habit of looking twice. The early human world is not safe, but it is often familiar enough to be negotiated. The camp wakes not into random fear, but into the daily labor of reading signs correctly. That labor begins with hunger. Hunger is not always emergency. In many foraging societies, ancient and recent, hunger comes in degrees, and the difference between mild uncertainty and real danger depends on memory, skill, and timing. One failed hunt means little. Two may still mean little if shellfish, roots, nuts, marrow, or scavenge scraps can bridge the gap. The human diet, even very early on, is flexible in ways that matter enormously. Our ancestors are not elegant specialists bound to one prey species or one narrow habitat. They are opportunists. That sounds unimpressive until one notices how powerful it becomes. The animals best designed for one environment often collapse when that environment shifts. Humans, by contrast, persist precisely because they are willing to eat differently, move differently, sleep differently, and pay attention longer than many of the animals around them. That flexibility is written deep into the story of human evolution. Long before villages, long before kings, long before monuments or grain stores or permanent homes, there is this simpler genius, the ability to notice, remember, adapt, and teach. A hand axe is not just a tool, it is frozen thought. Fire, when it comes under control, is not just warmth, it is scheduled time, protected calories, safer sleep, extended social memory after sunset. Even before that threshold, cooperation already changes everything. One individual alone is vulnerable in nearly every prehistoric landscape. A group that watches together, moves together, and remembers together is something else. Not strong enough to erase danger, but strong enough to bargain with it. There is a temptation to imagine these people as perpetually crouched at the edge of extinction, and in one sense they are. Human populations remain small for immense stretches of time. Genetic evidence suggests bottlenecks, local disappearances, and long intervals when survival is anything but guaranteed. Yet their daily lives are not composed entirely of spectacular crisis. Much of the time, survival depends on avoiding crisis in the first place. That distinction matters. The successful prehistoric camp is often the one that leaves no dramatic trace because it reads the land well enough not to be surprised. It does not sleep in the wash where floodwater suddenly runs. It does not linger near a carcass long enough to compete with larger predators. It does not waste daylight in a valley where game has already moved through. It notices the season turning before the season becomes catastrophe. This older relationship to danger may be one reason why the earliest human sense of the world is less about abstract fear and more about practical caution. Fear, in the modern sense, can become ambient, detached, generalized. Early on, it is likely narrower and more immediate. There is fear of the visible thing, the known place, the remembered event. There is no reason yet to assume that the whole world itself is unreliable. A valley may be dangerous. A night crossing may be dangerous. A waterhole at dusk may be dangerous, but the wider order of things still appears stable enough to be learned. Morning comes slowly over the plain. The band moves. Some go to water. Some scan for tracks. One carries a child against the hip. Another, older now, walks more slowly than before but still sees the details others miss. This kind of figure appears again and again in studies of mobile hunter-gatherers, the elder not as burden, but as archive. Knowledge is survival, and those who remember unusual seasons, strange migrations, rare edible plants, or the signs that precede predator movement can matter as much as the strongest hunter. Scholars still debate how far back such social roles can be projected with confidence, because the evidence remains incomplete. But no single explanation fully accounts for human success without giving memory and social learning a central place. That social learning does something subtle. It makes the world feel inhabited not only by threats, but by precedent. Someone has seen something like this before. Someone knows how long to wait before crossing. Someone knows that the fruit is safe only when the skin splits. that the river should not be trusted after mountain storms even if the sky above the camp is clear, that the hyenas will return to unfinished bone. The young do not begin from ignorance each morning. They inherit warnings. This inheritance is fragile, oral, embodied, and local, but it is one of the first true shelters humans ever build. Even so, there are limits. The land these people move through is not a stage built for them. It is full of other hungers, other bodies, other intelligences. Large cats study the same herd trails. Crocodiles wait at the same water margins. Packs of wild dogs test weakness as efficiently as any human hunting party. Venom hides under stone. Insects carry misery too small to fight with spears. Exposure itself is an enemy that does not need intention. A cold night after rain can kill as completely as claws. A twisted ankle can become a sentence. Infection, though invisible to them, is already one of the oldest assassins in the human story. But it is important not to let later knowledge flatten their world into pure misery. Alongside danger is competence. Alongside loss is skill so practiced it becomes almost invisible. Consider something as ordinary as moving camp. To later eyes it might seem aimless wandering. In reality it can represent a dense calculation of water access, fuel availability, game movement, shelter, distance, and risk. The choice of where to stop is a statement about how the group understands the landscape. Open ground offers visibility but less cover. Trees offer material and shade but conceal predators. Caves promise shelter, though not always ownership. Many were shared, contested, or intermittently occupied by carnivores as well as humans. No place is perfect. Safety is always partial, negotiated, temporary. That may be why the earliest human confidence, if it can be called confidence, is so modest. It is not the arrogance of mastery. It is the steadier expectation that if the signs are read correctly, the day can be survived, food can be found, water can be judged, shelter can be improvised, the children can be kept close, fire, if there is fire, can be guarded. Injuries can be carried for a while by the strength of others. The world is dangerous, but it is not yet imagined as treacherous at its foundations. And that distinction is where the long story begins, because eventually something changes, not everywhere at once, not on a single date, not as a neat revelation shared by all humans in all places. The turning point is slower, messier, and probably repeated many times across different landscapes. But before that shift becomes visible, before ancient people begin to encounter a world that seems less readable than before, there is this older age of conditional trust. They know the land can kill them. They know storms come, predators stalk, rivers rise, and winter strips the margin for error down to almost nothing. Yet they still move through familiar ecologies with an expectation that careful attention can keep disaster near the edges. In some ways, this is the first human bargain with the planet. We will study your moods, and in return we ask only enough predictability to endure. For long stretches, the bargain holds. The sky follows rough rhythms. The animals return often enough. Water sources fail and recover in patterns people can learn. Grasslands expand and contract, but not so violently that memory becomes useless. A camp can wake in the dark and believe that the world outside is dangerous. Yes, but still interpretable. That belief is fragile. It depends on seasons arriving close enough to expectation, prey moving where old experience says they should, familiar plants surviving in known patches, and the land itself behaving according to memory. Once those patterns begin to slip, once known signs lead to emptiness or trusted places turn lethal without warning, the human mind is forced into a harsher understanding. Safety stops being something negotiated through knowledge alone. The world becomes not just dangerous but unstable, and when that happens, fear changes shape as well. For now, though, the camp is still walking into morning under an older order. Feet press into dust that ancestors also crossed. Hands lift tools shaped by habits older than language in its modern form. Eyes search the same horizon where food, weather, and death all announce themselves in signs that can still, with effort, be read. The world has not yet become unrecognizable. It has not yet fully betrayed the trust of those who survive by memory. But the first cracks in that trust are coming. And when they come, humans will not merely find new dangers in the landscape. They will begin to understand that the landscape itself can change faster than memory can protect them. At first, the changes are small enough to be mistaken for bad luck. A waterhole shrinks earlier than expected. A herd arrives thin, nervous, and too late in the season. Fruit that should be heavy on the branch comes sparse and bitter. The wind carries more dust than scent. Underfoot, familiar ground hardens, cracks, or turns strangely soft after brief rain. A marsh edge that once held birds and reeds dries into sour mud. Elsewhere, in colder regions, paths once open for part of the year stay locked longer under frost. While meltwater runs in new directions and chews at banks people thought they understood. None of this announces itself as the beginning of a new world. It arrives in fragments. That is part of what makes it dangerous. For early humans, the land is never just scenery. It is a living arrangement of clues. When these clues stop lining up, the first response is not philosophy. It is adjustment. Move a little farther. Wait another day. Try a different ridge. Search an older patch of roots. Follow birds instead of hoof prints. Return to a spring remembered from a drier year. Human groups have likely been making such corrections for immense stretches of time. Climate, after all, has never been still. Long before written history, the Pleistocene world swings through cold phases, warmer intervals, pulses of wetness, advancing ice, retreating ice, expanding grasslands, shrinking forests, rising lakes, and empty basins. The evidence from sediments, pollen, isotopes, and ancient shorelines makes one thing very clear: early humans do not evolve in a calm world. They evolve inside fluctuation. But fluctuation has thresholds. A landscape can vary and still remain intelligible. Beyond a certain point, variation stops feeling like weather and begins to feel like betrayal. Scholars still debate exactly when and where that threshold is crossed for different human populations, because the evidence remains incomplete and the story is not the same on every continent. Yet what survives in the record suggests repeated moments when human groups face environments changing too quickly, too unevenly, or too severely for ordinary memory to remain reliable. In those moments, the old confidence that careful reading can keep disaster at bay begins to fail. One of the most unsettling truths about prehistoric climate is that some major changes happen not only over millennia, but over spans short enough to wound living communities directly. Later, paleoclimate research will reveal abrupt cooling events, sudden drought pulses, rapid shifts in rainfall belts, and large ecological reorganizations that compress danger into human time. A child can be born into one pattern of seasons and reach adulthood in another, an elder's memory, once a storehouse of life-saving knowledge, can suddenly become less useful than before. This does not mean experience stops mattering. It means experience starts to compete with novelty, and novelty in a foraging world can kill. Imagine the effect not from a satellite, but from the ground. A familiar route toward water yields only hoof-torn clay. Tree cover that once shaded the journey is thinned or burned away. Herds that migrated along a valley now cut across higher ground or vanish altogether. New animals appear where they had been rare. Old ones retreat. In some regions, grassland pushes into woodland. In others, scrub replaces richer grazing country. In others still, colder conditions pinch the range of plants and prey into narrower bands. Every shift rearranges not one species, but many. Predators follow prey. Scavengers follow both. Insects bloom in changed pools. Disease patterns may move with them, though early humans do not know the mechanism. The entire network drifts. To a creature depending on pattern, this is more than inconvenience. It is the weakening of reality's grammar. There is a lesser-known detail in this story that matters. Humans are not only reacting to climate in the abstract, they are reacting to patchiness. One valley may fail while another still holds water. One slope may keep edible bulbs after the plain dries. A coastal margin may remain rich while inland groups struggle. This unevenness creates both opportunity and tension. Those who move far enough may survive. Those who cannot, or who arrive too late, may encounter others already depending on the same refuge. Ecological stress does not spread like ink on a flat page. It comes in pockets, edges, corridors, islands of abundance inside growing scarcity. That makes the world harder to read, not easier, because old general rules stop working. A region cannot be judged as one thing anymore. It becomes a mosaic of shifting chances. In such a mosaic, timing becomes as important as strength. To reach a seasonal lake too early may mean wasting precious energy. To reach it too late may mean finding churned mud, trampled banks, and the spoor of larger animals already concentrated there. Migratory prey, likewise, become more difficult when their roots loosen. Hunting is never simple, but stable patterns at least allow anticipation. Once those patterns wobble, the cost of error rises sharply. A missed intercept is not just a bad day. It can mean children eating less, adults walking farther, tempers shortening, risks increasing. It is tempting to imagine prehistoric people responding to environmental stress only by moving. But movement is expensive. Every step costs calories. Every relocation means carrying children, tools, embers, old injuries, and uncertainty. Every move into less familiar territory reduces the value of inherited knowledge. Even a successful relocation may place a group in a landscape where they know fewer edible plants, cannot yet read the signs of predators with confidence, or misunderstand the rhythm of local weather. Adaptation, in other words, is not a graceful shift from one map to another. It is often a wager made while already tired. And yet humans persist because they keep making such wagers. This is one of the great hard truths beneath the romantic image of prehistory. Survival is not the reward for perfect wisdom. It often belongs to those who can improvise under partial knowledge. A changing world favors minds able to learn quickly, copy useful behavior, and abandon familiar habits when those habits stop paying back. Some archaeological evidence hints at exactly this increasing flexibility, changing stone tool strategies, varied diets, broader use of difficult foods, movement across wider ranges, or more intensive exploitation of particular habitats when others falter. The pattern is not universal and should not be simplified into a single upward march. But it suggests a species under pressure becoming more inventive because pressure leaves little alternative. Still, there is a psychological cost, even if we must infer it carefully. Humans are meaning-making animals. They build expectation from repetition. A stable world lets them compress uncertainty into routine. An unstable one forces attention outward again and again. More scanning, more caution, more failed predictions. More occasions when knowledge feels almost sufficient, but not enough. No single explanation fully accounts for the emergence of deep human anxiety about the landscape. Yet repeated exposure to ecological surprise must have played some role. The world no longer merely contains hazards. It develops the capacity to disappoint memory. This is where the shift becomes profound. When a lion kills, the lesson is brutal but clear. Avoid that thicket, guard the weak, watch the herd animals, do not linger at dusk. When the rains fail, in a way no living adult remembers, or when cold lingers, or when the migration does not come, the lesson is harder. There may be no clear enemy to blame, no track to follow back to its source. The danger is distributed across absence, empty sky, quiet grass, dry channels, silence where noise should be. Early humans are already capable of reading presence. Now they must learn to read omission. Absence is one of the great teachers of prehistory. No carcasses where scavengers should gather. No birds lifting from reeds because there are no reeds left. No fish trapped in shrinking pools because the pools vanished first. No scent of herd on a route worn into the ground by generations of hoof and foot. To modern people, absence is often abstract. To foragers, it is immediate information. It is the shape of days becoming longer, of children growing restless, of older people walking with more effort and less reward. It is the first signal that the world's promises are thinning. And because humans are social, environmental stress is never only environmental. Fewer resources mean harder choices about whom to feed first, when to move, how long to risk waiting, whether to split the group, whether to revisit a dangerous area because it once provided well, whether to challenge scavengers, whether to cross territory known to hold predators or perhaps other humans. The evidence remains incomplete on how often such decisions lead to open conflict this early. But what survives in ethnographic analogy and archaeological inference suggests one constant scarcity sharpens every calculation. It also magnifies mistakes. There is another surprise here. The more variable the landscape becomes, the more valuable imagination becomes alongside memory. Memory says where water used to be. Imagination says where else it might now collect if the old spring fails. Memory says when prey used to pass. Imagination says what route they may choose if fresh growth appeared elsewhere. In a stable world, memory dominates. In an unstable one, survival begins to depend on minds capable of running possibilities. That may be one of the quiet revolutions hidden inside prehistoric hardship. Danger does not only make humans fearful, it may also help make them more speculative, more experimental, more alert to alternatives not yet seen. Even so, imagination can also mislead. A desperate group may gamble on distance and find nothing. It may trust a remembered refuge now emptied by drought or crowded by animals too dangerous to challenge. It may burn energy chasing signs from another season. One of the darkest features of ecological instability is that it punishes both rigidity and bad improvisation. There is no universal rule that guarantees safety. People must guess better than the landscape changes. Across thousands of years and many regions, this shifting ground leaves scattered traces in stone, bone, and sediment. Occupation layers thin out in some places and thicken in others. Tools appear far from expected raw material sources, hinting at wider movement or exchange. Animal remains suggest broader diets or more selective butchery. In cave records, pollen turns over, charcoal pulses, Cold-loving species replace warmer ones, then retreat again. We reconstruct these changes from fragments, always imperfectly, but the overall picture is difficult to escape. Early humans are learning, again and again, that the world is not a fixed stage through which they merely travel. It is a moving system, indifferent to memory and unimpressed by need. By the time that lesson begins to settle, danger itself has changed category. It is no longer only the visible threat at the edge of camp. It is the slower realization that a place known since childhood may stop behaving like itself. A valley can fail. A season can fail. A migration can fail. Even abundance can become suspicious if it appears where it should not. Because abundance in the wrong place may signal instability elsewhere. The landscape starts to feel less like a partner in a difficult bargain, and more like something with its own unreadable timing. This does not mean humans abandon trust all at once. They cannot. They still must drink, hunt, gather, sleep, and move. But under those daily actions a new tension grows. Every familiar sign carries a second question. Is it still true? Every remembered place carries another. Will it hold that second layer of doubt, maybe one of the oldest forms of human unease, born not from one predator or one storm, but from the slow discovery that change itself can become a predator? So the band keeps walking, but less certain now that old paths deserve old confidence. The children learn names for plants and animals, yet also learn that names do not guarantee finding. The elders remember fuller streams, thicker herds, softer ground, and perhaps wonder privately whether their wisdom is fraying or the land itself has changed. Neither answer brings comfort. The first cracks have widened. The world is still readable in places, but no longer everywhere. And when a landscape begins to shift beneath inherited knowledge, hunger is never far behind. Hunger rarely arrives as a single dramatic event. It accumulates. It begins as a slight thinning of certainty, a longer walk before the first useful track appears, a return to camp with less than expected, a quiet division of food made more carefully than before. At first the body can hide it. Adults know how to carry emptiness without display. They have done it before. A meal missed today can be answered tomorrow. Fat from marrow, shellfish from the shore, a clutch of eggs. Bitter roots softened in water, insects shaken from rotten wood, scraps stolen from a kill abandoned by stronger hunters. All of it can close the gap for a while. Human beings are remarkably inventive when pressed. That is one reason they spread so far. But hunger is patient, and unlike a predator, it does not need to rush. In a stable season, scarcity has edges. People know when lean times come and what usually follows them. They expect the hard weeks before fruiting, the difficult stretch before migratory animals return. The days when cold reduces movement and calories vanish faster than they can be replaced. These periods are dangerous, but they belong to a pattern. The body suffers inside a framework that memory understands. What begins to change in a less reliable world is not merely the intensity of hunger, but its timing. It comes out of place. It lingers beyond expectation. It interrupts the older rhythm that once made hardship tolerable, because hardship had a known end. There is a profound difference between being hungry in the season of hunger and being hungry when abundance should already have arrived. The first can be endured with discipline. The second carries a deeper warning. It suggests that something beyond the immediate campfire has shifted. The herd has not come. The figs have failed. The fish run is poor. The river level is wrong for this point in the year. The root patch has been exhausted, buried, or dried beyond recovery. What survives in the record suggests again and again that early humans live within fine margins, and fine margins make repeated absence far more dangerous than sudden drama. The body can survive a chase, a storm, a wound. It survives long attrition much less easily. The hunt, under such conditions, becomes more than the pursuit of meat. It becomes a test of whether the old world still functions. Hunters leave camp with more than spears, clubs, stone points, or sharpened wood. They carry expectation. They know where animals should cross, where they should drink, where they should pause, where the ground should preserve hoof marks, where vultures should circle by mid-morning. A day with no sign is not simply a failed effort. It is a fracture in confidence. 2 such days, 3, and the entire logic of movement begins to wobble. One of the least appreciated facts about prehistoric hunger is how much time it consumes even before starvation begins. Well-fed people can afford inefficiency. Hungry people cannot. As resources thin, more hours must be invested in search, more ground must be covered, more risks must be accepted. The cost of choosing wrong increases, but so does the pressure to choose quickly. In that sense, hunger changes the mind before it changes the skeleton. It narrows attention. It shortens tempers. It can make a distant gamble feel wiser than a cautious wait. Scholars still debate how visible these mental and social effects are in the archaeological record. Because bones do not preserve mood, and stone tools do not record argument, but no single explanation fully accounts for shifting patterns of mobility and sight use without recognizing the force of caloric stress. The children feel it first in ways adults try to hide. Portions become less generous, then more irregular. Nursing may continue longer where possible, but mothers under stress produce under stress as well. For the very young, hunger is not theoretical. Growth slows, irritability rises, illness becomes more dangerous because recovery needs energy, and energy is scarce. Older children, meanwhile, are drawn earlier into the labour of gathering, carrying, watching, and enduring. In a world under pressure, childhood narrows. There's less room for waste, less room for trial and error. Even play may begin to mirror survival more directly, because imitation of a useful behaviour is no longer only cultural continuity. It is preparation against the next empty day. Adults make calculations they do not speak aloud, or at least not in forms later humans would recognise as discussion. They know which members of the group can still walk long distances and which cannot. They know who has the skill to locate water by reading soil, bird movement, insect swarms, or the persistence of certain plants. They know who becomes reckless when hungry and who grows methodical. These judgments matter because hunger does not strike a band equally. The strong may still function while the old slow, the injured fail, the pregnant falter, and the very young become dangerously quiet. A group can carry weakness for a time, especially if social bonds are strong. But carrying weakness also requires surplus, and hunger is precisely what removes it. This is where the landscape begins to feel actively instructive in a cruel way. It teaches through denial. A stream that once saved a group now offers only mud. A gully once full of roots has been dug clean by others, or turned sterile by shifting moisture. Trees that usually attract birds stand silent. The silence matters. Hunger makes people listen harder. They notice missing sounds as much as present ones. The absence of insects at water, the lack of movement in brush, the failure of scavengers to gather where they normally would. All of it forms a negative map. It is not abundance pointing the way, but emptiness warning them off. The body under repeated hunger also starts to alter behavior in subtler ways. People conserve movement when they can. They travel more deliberately or under desperation, more erratically. They butcher more thoroughly. Bones are cracked for marrow with greater care. Skins, sinew, fat, brains, organs, tendons. All the parts ignored by later luxury become central, because in truth they always were central. There is no clean division between food and material. The same carcass feeds the body, clothes it, tools it, shelters it. In times of stress, this total use becomes even more important. A successful kill is no longer only a meal, it is several postponed dangers at once. Yet successful kills may become rarer precisely when they are most needed. Animals under ecological stress change too. They migrate earlier, later, or by different routes. They arrive thinner and yield less fat. They grow more skittish around water where predators, including humans, now wait in greater numbers. Some abandon familiar ranges entirely. Others die off locally, leaving behind only old dung, scattered bone, and pathways fading under new grasses or dust. What early humans confront, then, is not simply less food. It is a moving target shaped by pressures they can observe only in fragments. This is why hunger becomes a warning before it becomes a catastrophe. It reveals that the old chain linking memory to survival is weakening. When plants fail, perhaps the hunt will compensate. When the hunt fails, perhaps shellfish, eggs, grubs, nuts, or carrion will bridge the gap. When several of these fail in the same span, the conclusion becomes harder to avoid. The land is not merely stingy. The land is changing faster than the band can easily answer. A few bad days may belong to luck. Too many begin to resemble a message. There is a lesser-known pattern in human evolution that belongs here. Some of the most important shifts in behavior likely happen not in times of easy plenty, but under repeated nutritional stress, broader diets, more complex food processing, more careful transport of resources, longer social dependence, perhaps even deeper cooperation in sharing and risk buffering. All may be sharpened by the need to survive unpredictability. This does not make hunger beneficial, it makes it formative. People innovate because they are cornered by necessity, not inspired by comfort. A tuber that once seemed too laborious to dig, clean, soak, or roast becomes worthwhile when easier calories vanish. Small prey once ignored becomes important. Coastal resources become lifelines. Drying, caching, or delaying consumption where possible begins to matter more. Pressure changes taste by changing what cannot be refused. Still, there are limits to ingenuity. A starving population cannot invent its way out of every ecological collapse. The evidence remains incomplete on exactly how many groups disappeared without leaving a clear trace. But the prehistoric record is full of absences that may represent more than simple gaps in preservation. Camps vanish from certain zones. Occupation pulses thin. Human presence retreats from some regions and concentrates in others. Behind those patterns likely stand countless ordinary crises that never earn names a dry year too many. A herd missed, a child lost to weakness, an elder who cannot continue, a split decision about where to go next that turns out wrong. And hunger does more than weaken muscle. It alters social gravity. Food sharing is one of the oldest human strategies for buffering bad luck. But sharing only works when someone has something to give. Under severe stress, tensions sharpen around fairness, contribution, age, need, and leadership. Who eats first? Who hunts again despite exhaustion? Whether to feed the injured one more day, whether to remain together or divide so that smaller groups burden the land less heavily, whether to revisit dangerous ground because it once provided enough. These are not abstract moral dilemmas. They are the first politics of scarcity, played out without writing, law, or formal authority, but with consequences just as real as anything later states will face. The emotional texture of such moments is difficult to recover, and honesty requires admitting that much of it must be inferred. But inference has limits grounded in biology and common human structure. Hungry people become more vigilant, more reactive, more willing to gamble under pressure, and more vulnerable to conflict within the group. They also become more dependent on trust, because no one survives long alone in these conditions. Hunger can fray cooperation, yet it can also reveal how essential cooperation already is. The contradiction sits at the center of human survival. Scarcity makes others harder to tolerate and harder to live without. As the days lengthen with too little success, the camp itself begins to change. Movement becomes quieter. Less energy is spent on unnecessary action. Fires may be kept smaller if fuel is scarce, or if the group must move before dawn. Jokes, play, and idle noise diminish, not because humanity disappears, but because the body defends itself by narrowing to essentials. Even rest is different when underfed. Sleep lightens, cold penetrates more deeply, wounds heal more slowly. Small infections grow more dangerous. A body that lacks calories has less patience with injury, and prehistoric life is full of injuries. Then comes the more dangerous shift hunger persuades people to take chances they would normally avoid. They go farther into predator territory. They approach carcasses more aggressively. They attempt hunts in bad light or uncertain terrain. They dig where snakes shelter. They cross ground with poor visibility because a shortcut may save a few precious hours. They challenge larger scavengers for marrow-rich remains. They eat things only half known, or known but usually avoided. In this way, hunger recruits other dangers into its service. It is not just a lack of food. It is a force that pushes bodies toward claws, venom, falls, exposure, and one another. By now the lesson has become clear enough to be felt even if not stated. The world is no longer dangerous only in the obvious places. It is dangerous in the gaps between expectation and reality. It is dangerous because the old signals do not lead where they once led. A failed hunt used to be an event. Now it becomes evidence. An empty patch used to be a nuisance. Now it becomes a warning. Hunger teaches the band that survival cannot rest on habit alone. Something larger is shifting beneath every familiar path, and so they move again, not because movement is wise in itself, but because staying still has begun to look worse. The old confidence is thinner now. Children are quieter. Adults scan farther. The elders remember fuller seasons and perhaps say less than before, because memory itself has become painful when it no longer helps. Hunger has done what claws and storms alone could not. It has taught humans that danger can arrive invisibly, spread slowly, and dismantle life from within the ordinary day. Once that lesson settles into the mind, the world never quite feels innocent again. Long before humans become the most dangerous hunters on Earth, they spend immense stretches of time living as hunted animals among other hunted animals. That fact is easy to blur in hindsight because later human success is so overwhelming. Spears improve, fire spreads, cooperation deepens, landscapes are reshaped, predators retreat or disappear. But far back in the older world, before safety can be manufactured on any reliable scale, early humans move through food webs that do not make special exceptions for intelligence. A sharp mind helps. So does a sharpened stone. Neither guarantees that a body walking to water at dusk will return. The pressure from predators is not constant in the theatrical sense. Most days pass without direct attack. That is what makes the danger so exhausting. It lives in possibility. A leopard may be nowhere nearby, or it may already be watching from shade. Hyenas may ignore a human group at one carcass and harass them at the next. Crocodiles remain invisible until the moment invisibility ends. Great birds of prey can threaten infants. Snakes do not need to hunt a whole band to alter how a camp uses ground, wood or rock. Danger gathers at edges, in reeds, under overhangs, near kills, beside water, in the last light and first light, wherever visibility weakens and appetite is stronger than caution. Early humans learn these edges not from theory, but from repetition paid for in blood. This is one reason the body itself becomes an instrument of survival. Eyes adjust to movement, ears separate wind from footfall. Skin learns the difference between ordinary evening chill and the colder feeling that comes from standing too long exposed while listening for something unseen. The nervous system, under such conditions, is not an accidental burden. It is a tool honed by selection. Later humans will call such traits anxiety, vigilance, overreaction. In the older world, they often mean the difference between life and not life. To start at a shadow may be wasteful 10 times and useful the 11th. Natural selection is perfectly content with that bargain. Predator pressure likely shapes more of human life than old popular images once admitted. For a long time, prehistory was narrated as a triumphalist sequence in which humans rise steadily by outsmarting the beasts around them. There is truth in the eventual outcome, but the journey is less flattering. Many early humans are not apex predators in the habitats they occupy. They are clever, cooperative omnivores with exposed flesh, slow-developing young, limited raw speed, and a dangerous habit of carrying calories openly back to camp. They can defend themselves, certainly. They can also be tracked, ambushed, and tested. In some places they may compete successfully with large carnivores at kills. In others, they may lose. Scholars still debate the balance between active hunting and confrontational scavenging in certain early periods, because the evidence remains incomplete. But no serious reading of the ancient landscape leaves humans standing above the food chain from the beginning. This matters because the realization that the world is unsafe does not come only from weather or hunger. It also comes from the humiliating fact that other mouths are interested in the same bodies, the same children, the same wounded and stragglers. Humans do not merely fear predators as isolated attackers. They are forced to recognize them as neighbors in an ecosystem of competition. The lion and the hyena are not monsters in a story. They are specialists. They read weakness just as humans read tracks. They learn routines. They watch access points. A waterhole that sustains a band also concentrates threat. A carcass that promises marrow also signals conflict. Safety becomes a matter not simply of strength, but of constant negotiation with other forms of hunger. There is something especially corrosive about predation, because it turns ordinary acts into gambles. Walking for water is necessary. Gathering fuel is necessary. Following wounded prey into brush is necessary if the calories are not to be lost. Even relieving oneself away from camp can become dangerous if done carelessly. A prehistoric group cannot avoid risk by withdrawing indoors, because there is no indoors in the later sense, and even caves, when used, are rarely perfect sanctuaries. Many are already occupied part of the time by carnivores or are marked by their presence. The archaeological record from some cave systems preserves this uncomfortable truth. With unusual clarity, human remains and predator remains appear in the same spaces, sometimes alternating through time, sometimes perhaps closer than anyone would have preferred. Shelter is contested, night is porous. This is one reason fire matters so much when humans begin controlling it more reliably. But before fire becomes dependable, darkness belongs more fully to teeth and uncertainty. Eyesight, one of humanity's great daytime strengths, weakens badly at night compared with that of many predators. Smell is limited, hearing helps, but only so far. The camp at dusk does not merely settle, it braces. Bodies cluster more tightly. Children stay nearer. The weak are not left at the edge if it can be helped. The perimeter of attention shrinks. Every sound acquires a second meaning. The cracking branch might be nothing. It might also not be nothing, and the difference is often learned too late. Predator pressure also sharpens the value of numbers. Alone, a human is vulnerable in most prehistoric landscapes. In a group, especially an alert one, the balance changes. Many carnivores prefer surprise and asymmetry. They are less eager when watched by several upright, noisy, coordinated primates willing to throw stones, brandish sticks, or charge together. Group living therefore becomes more than social preference. It becomes anti-predator architecture, not perfect, not invulnerable, but effective enough to matter. What survives in ethnographic comparison and evolutionary reasoning suggests that collective vigilance, alarm behavior, and mutual defense are not side effects of humanity. They are part of the foundation. That foundation, however, is fragile around the margins. The very old may not keep pace. The very young may stray. Injury turns competence into exposure in a single step. A twisted knee, a deep cut, an infected bite, a fever, all can lower someone from participant to target. Predators are excellent judges of diminished capacity. So are humans, which may be why the emotional force of caring for the injured runs so deep in our species. Assistance is moral, yes, but in the older world it is also practical resistance against a landscape that punishes weakness instantly. A group that carries the wounded is defying the easy arithmetic of predation. There is a lesser-known detail here that often goes overlooked. Predators do not need to kill often to shape human behavior powerfully. Even low attack rates can produce intense vigilance if the consequences are severe enough. One child taken near reeds, one sleeper dragged from a poorly chosen camp, one collector bitten in a rock crevice, one hunter mauled while finishing wounded prey, and memory absorbs the lesson for years. Places become marked in the mind. Routes are altered. Times of day are reassessed. The world fills with conditional rules. Do not go alone. Do not approach that pool at dusk. Do not carry meat openly along the low path. Do not sleep where cover comes too close. Fear is not yet abstract. It is cartographic. It maps itself onto the land. This cartography of danger likely becomes one of the earliest deep structures of human thought. Safe and unsafe are not moral categories at first. They are spatial ones, open versus concealed, high ground versus low, dry footing versus mud, long sight lines versus blind corners, escape route versus trap. A child learns such distinctions not through formal teaching alone, but through repeated correction, imitation, and the emotional charge adults attach to certain places. The record cannot preserve those tones of warning directly, but what it does preserve suggests their necessity: site selection, repeated use of defensible locations, clustering patterns, and the eventual intensification of fire use all point toward a species increasingly serious about manufacturing zones of reduced vulnerability. Yet reduced vulnerability is not the same as safety. That difference remains crucial. Humans can lower risk. They cannot erase it. Even a well-placed camp may lie on the path of a desperate carnivore in a dry season. Even coordinated adults can lose a member in confusion at night. Even success in driving off predators can come at the cost of injury, lost sleep, stress, and abandonment of valuable food. In this sense, predators are teachers of a harsh principle. The world can be read correctly and still punish you. A band may choose the right water source, travel at the right hour, stay together, watch carefully, and still encounter a threat whose timing defeats preparation. Once that happens often enough, the old belief that skill alone secures survival starts to weaken. Predators also intersect with hunger in ugly ways. Scarce environments compress everyone toward the same resources. Humans approach water more often when thirsty, carcasses more quickly when desperate, vulnerable animals more boldly when in need of meat. Carnivores do the same. Drought, therefore, is not merely less water, it is more concentrated competition. Failing prey migrations, likewise, do not only deprive humans of calories, they intensify encounters at remaining feeding grounds and choke points. In such moments, human groups are not just discovering that lions exist, they are discovering that ecological stress multiplies the danger of every necessary act. There may also be a subtler cognitive legacy here. To live for generations under intermittent predator pressure is to cultivate minds that treat unexplained movement as meaningful until proven otherwise. Modern people still inherit something of that bias. We notice eyes in patterns, agency in rustles, presence in shadows. Much of it can seem irrational in electrified rooms and locked houses. In the older world, it's often plain prudence. False alarms cost little. Ignored signals can cost lineage. Scholars still debate how directly such ancient pressures translate into modern psychology, and caution is warranted, but the broad connection is difficult to dismiss. Human attention is not merely curious, it is suspicious for reasons with deep roots. The result is that the edges of camp become moralized in experience long before they are moralized in story. Children learn where they are not to wander. Adults correct the careless sharply. Those who laugh at danger too often are eventually answered by danger itself. The landscape enforces seriousness. It may also encourage a new kind of leadership, not simply the strongest or boldest, but the person best at sensing when boldness becomes stupidity. Predator-rich worlds reward judgment as much as courage, sometimes more, and still, perhaps most unsettling of all, predators reveal an ancient symmetry. Humans watch, humans stalk, humans coordinate in silence, exploit weakness, and learn patterns. Other predators do the same. To recognize that is to understand that the world contains other intelligences, not human ones, but minds nevertheless tuned to the same realities of concealment, timing, and opportunity. Early humans are not alone in being clever. They are only one problem-solving species among several, and for a long time not the most physically dominant one. That realization must have carried its own dark force. The world is not just dangerous because it has fangs. It is dangerous because some of those fangs are attached to creatures that know how to wait. So the group tightens its habits. It keeps closer to open ground when it can. It watches water from a distance before approaching. It learns the meaning of bird alarms, hoof panic, sudden silence. It treats dusk with respect. It treats blood with respect. It learns that being many is a kind of shield and that weakness, however temporary, attracts the wrong attention. These lessons do not arrive in a single generation, nor do they emerge evenly in every place. But across the long prehistoric world they accumulate into a harder view of existence. Humans are not merely beings who confront danger. They're edible beings who become intelligent, partly because the world insists on testing whether intelligence is enough. And that pressure from the margins does something permanent. It teaches humans that threat is not only in the dramatic event, but in the waiting presence just outside vision. Not every rustle matters. Some do. Not every trip to water ends badly. Some do. Not every patch of reeds hides a hunter. Some do. The world, in other words, is no longer divided simply into known dangers and safe routine. Routine itself is lined with teeth. Once humans begin to feel that deeply, they no longer walk through the landscape as if caution alone can preserve them. They begin to understand that life is being lived under watch. Darkness is one of the oldest rulers in human history, before lamps, before houses sealed against weather, before windows, roads, walls, and clocks. Night arrives as a territorial change. The world does not simply become harder to see, it becomes another place, governed by different advantages. Shapes flatten, distance lies, sounds seem nearer or impossibly far. Familiar paths lose their familiarity within a few steps. The horizon disappears. Eyes that serve humans well in daylight surrender much of their usefulness, while other creatures begin their truer day. If predators teach early humans that they can be hunted, night teaches them that the very conditions of perception can turn against them. The world is no longer unsafe only because something in it may attack. It is unsafe because the mind itself can no longer read clearly. That change is difficult for modern people to feel. Electric light has erased much of its force. Even in darkness today, there is usually a wall, a switch, a street lamp, a clock face, a door that closes. Prehistoric night offers none of this reassurance. A camp may have embers, or later controlled fire, but outside that small ring the dark thickens almost at once. A few steps away, the ground can drop, roots can twist underfoot, thorn and rock can tear skin, and things with better hearing, smell, or vision can move unseen. One of the oldest human experiences may be the sensation of listening into blackness, aware that the world continues there but no longer willing to reveal in what form. And darkness is only one part of the lesson. Weather joins it. Cold, rain, wind, lightning, flood, hail, heat, dust, freezing spray, all the larger moods of the atmosphere become forces that attack without teeth and without intention. There is a particular terror in that. A predator can be avoided, outwatched, or driven off. A storm cannot be argued with. It does not care whether the camp has children, whether the injured can move, whether the group walked all day and has no strength left. It changes the terms of life at once and often without warning precise enough to protect everyone. In a world where shelter is partial and mobile, weather is never background. It is power. At first, humans likely know the sky as they know the land by habit, by pattern, by long observation. They learn the look of heat before it settles, the smell of rain before it breaks, the shape of clouds that mean brief relief and those that mean violence. They notice how animals react before storms, how insects alter their movement, how wind changes at dusk in certain places, how mountain weather differs from open plain, how coastal fog deceives distance. This knowledge matters deeply. What survives in the records suggests that survival long depends on such environmental literacy. Yet as with hunger and shifting climate, weather has thresholds beyond which knowledge loses its edge. Storms can arrive too fast. Cold can deepen too far. Water can rise from beyond the visible range of the people it will drown. Consider rain on open ground. In moderation, it brings life, softens soil, refills hollows, greens shoots, and attracts prey. In excess, it strips warmth from the body with astonishing speed. Wet skin under wind becomes a kind of exposure trap. A group without adequate cover can survive one miserable night this way, perhaps, but repeated drenching is another matter. The body chilled after hunger has little reserve left. Infants lose heat quickly. The elderly recover slowly. Sleep breaks into shivering intervals. Tools slip in cold hands. Fire, if there is fire, becomes harder to keep and more precious than almost anything. There is no drama in this, no roaring beast, no visible enemy, and yet weather can destroy a group as thoroughly as a successful attack. Cold, especially, may have been one of the great silent sculptors of human caution. In tropical and subtropical zones, cold is still a danger under rain and wind, particularly at night, but in more temperate or glacial landscapes, it becomes an organizing threat. Not all prehistoric humans occupy the same climates, and one must be careful not to flatten the story into a single planetary experience. Still, across large parts of the Pleistocene world, dropping temperatures, seasonal extremes, and sudden cold snaps repeatedly test the limit of body shelter and ingenuity. A human body without insulation, dry refuge, and sufficient calories is a temporary arrangement in severe cold. Scholars still debate the exact timing and extent of certain cold adaptations, but the broad fact is clear enough: humans do not simply enter difficult climates and remain unchanged. They are forced to rethink movement, clothing, fuel, food, and social coordination under pressure. Wind has its own cruelty. It strips heat, carries grit, twists smoke, bends flame away from tinder, drives dust into eyes, and turns exposed ground into something psychologically larger than it is. A windy night in open terrain does not just chill the body, it frays attention. Conversation becomes harder, listening becomes less reliable, sleep becomes shallower. Small children panic more easily when every hide flap snaps and every shrub whispers with the same false urgency. There is a reason later human architecture everywhere seems obsessed with blocking drafts and securing warmth. Long before walls, people already understand at the level of the nervous system that moving air can be a threat. Then there is lightning, one of the great prehistoric revelations. A storm on open plain or broken highland can transform the sky into violence visible for great distances. Thunder arrives not as scenery but as domination, shaking the chest, startling animals, breaking the rhythm of all ordinary movement. Lightning can split trees, ignite grass, strike near water, and kill without contact in ways early humans cannot explain. It is not difficult to imagine how such events carve themselves into memory. They compress sky and death into one event. They prove that danger can descend from above with no track, no scent, no warning proportional to its power. Flood may be even more instructive because it weaponizes familiar ground. A dry channel can become a wall of moving water after distant rain beyond the horizon. A campsite secure at dusk can turn exposed by dawn if banks soften and collapse. River crossings taken safely many times may fail catastrophically under changed flow. Wetlands expand into routes once dry. Valleys funnel destruction. The evidence remains incomplete on how often specific prehistoric groups are struck by such events. But no single explanation of ancient caution can ignore the repetitive lesson offered by flood-prone landscapes. The Earth does not always look like what it is about to become. This lesson is especially severe because humans are creatures of place memory. A band may return to a known camp because it succeeded before. A hunter may trust a route because it held last season. A woman carrying a child may descend toward water by a path used many times. Then a storm elsewhere, unseen, alters everything. In such moments, the problem is not lack of intelligence. It is that the world contains distant causes. Rain over a ridge can kill a person beneath clear sky downstream. That is a difficult truth for any mind to absorb without instruments, and even modern people misjudge it. For early humans, such experiences must have carried a special force. They reveal that danger is no longer only local to perception. Heat, too, belongs in this story. Excessive heat does not always announce itself as spectacular crisis. It drains judgment, thickens thirst, spoils meat faster, and extends the distance between viable water sources. Under prolonged heat, movement must be timed differently. Shade becomes strategy, and water knowledge becomes power of the highest order. A group can survive poor food longer than poor water. The line between discomfort and collapse is thinner than memory likes to admit. In hot environments especially, the world teaches one of its oldest and least forgiving rules: misjudge water, and nothing else matters. When weather and exposure begin to combine with hunger and predator stress, human life enters a harsher logic. Rain means cold. Cold means more calories needed. Scarcity means fewer calories available. Weakness means greater vulnerability to predators and disease. Storms may scatter prey, erase tracks, foul fuel, and force shelter in places where visibility worsens. Every threat multiplies the next. This is one reason the world begins to feel more deeply unsafe than simple lists of danger would suggest. The problem is not only that storms, dark, predators, and hunger exist, it is that they reinforce each other. There is also a quieter psychological inheritance here. Weather is unpredictable enough to unsettle confidence, but patterned enough to invite expectation. That combination breeds a very human form of tension. The sky often behaves, then suddenly it does not. The river is usually passable, then one day it is not. The night is mostly survivable, then once in a while it is not. This irregularity matters. A constant threat can be organized around. An intermittent one keeps the mind alert in a different way. It teaches preparedness without certainty, and preparedness without certainty easily hardens into vigilance. Lesser-known evidence from recent foraging societies, while not a direct mirror of the deep past, suggests just how carefully human groups can structure daily life around exposure risks, camp orientation, timing of travel, placement of children, storage of embers, selection of sleeping surfaces, even the use of windbreaks so simple that they leave almost no archaeological trace. That last point matters because prehistory often appears barer than it was. Many of the small technologies of surviving weather vanish completely from the record. Hides rot, brush walls disappear, temporary coverings leave little sign. Yet the absence of evidence is not evidence of passivity. Humans are almost certainly improvising constantly against the sky, even where the material traces are gone. Still, improvisation is not enough when conditions exceed the margin. A storm can tear apart a camp faster than it can be rebuilt. A cold snap can arrive before sufficient fuel is gathered. A flood can isolate a group from known resources. A heat wave can turn a long walk into a fatal mistake. The early human understanding of safety therefore becomes more sophisticated and more fragile at the same time. They learn not merely that the world contains dangerous things, but that the medium in which life happens, air and darkness and temperature and water itself, can become hostile without warning. This changes the meaning of shelter. Shelter is no longer simply a convenient place to sleep. It becomes the difference between existence and exposure, a rock overhang, a line of trees breaking wind, a hollow above flood level, a cave mouth with visibility, a ridge that keeps fog from settling too thickly. All acquire strategic value. The search for such places may be among the earliest continuous human projects, older than any wall, and more urgent than any later architecture. To sleep well is to risk less. To wake dry is to hunt better. To survive the storm is to keep the group intact long enough to face the next day's hunger. And perhaps this is the deeper turn. Predators teach humans that living things may want to kill them. Weather teaches them that the world need not want anything at all in order to do the same. There is no malice in lightning, no hunger in flood, no hatred in cold. Yet they kill as effectively as intention. That realization broadens fear. It moves danger beyond the realm of visible enemies into the fabric of existence itself. The sky darkens, the wind shifts, the river rises, and suddenly the lesson is impossible to ignore. The world does not need a reason. So evening falls again over the camp, and with it comes an older unease made sharper by experience. Children are drawn close. The vulnerable are placed where others can reach them. The sky is read, the ground reconsidered, the edges watched. No one mistakes routine for safety now. Night may pass quietly, and often it does. The storm may turn away, and often it does. But often is no longer enough to restore trust. The world has shown too many ways to become dangerous without signal, without intention, without mercy, and once humans begin to feel exposed not only to creatures but to darkness, cold, flood, and sky itself, the desire for a more durable shield becomes impossible to resist. That shield is small when it first appears. It does not look like civilization. It does not look like mastery. It is only a patch of altered darkness, a place where night pulls back a little and the world beyond the circle hesitates. Fire begins as one of the most dangerous things in nature, a force of heat, smoke, panic, and ruin that runs through dry grass faster than feet can follow and leaves animals fleeing in confused streams. Early humans must have known it first as catastrophe. Lightning strikes a tree line, a brush fire rolls under wind, the ground blackens, the air turns bitter, burrows fill with heat, carcasses roast where they fall. For a long time, fire is probably watched from the edge with the same grim respect given to flood or storm. Then, at some point so deep in time that the evidence remains frustratingly incomplete, watching becomes opportunism, and opportunism becomes control. No single moment announces that transition. Scholars still debate how early different human species reliably used fire and, more importantly, how early they could make it rather than merely preserve it. Burned bones, reddened sediments, charcoal traces, hearth-like features all offer clues, but the record is uneven and often disputed. Some sites suggest very ancient use. Others, once celebrated as proof, have become less certain under closer analysis. What is clear is not the exact date of mastery, but the scale of the transformation once control becomes dependable. Fire changes the terms of human life so profoundly that it's difficult to think of another prehistoric threshold more intimate. A sharpened stone extends the hand. Fire extends the day, the camp, the diet, the social world, and perhaps even thought itself. Before fire, darkness belongs largely to what can see better than humans. With fire, darkness becomes divided. There is still danger beyond the light, but there is now a boundary, however fragile, between exposure and some degree of command. Predators that might approach more boldly in total dark may stop at flame or smoke. Insects thin. Cold retreats enough for bodies to loosen rather than clench. Wet food can be warmed. Tough roots soften. Meat changes texture, smell, digestibility, and safety. The camp at night becomes not only a place of endurance, but a place of gathering. Faces remain visible after sunset. Hands keep working. Memory can be spoken longer into the evening. The human day widens. It is difficult to overstate what this means in a world already taught to distrust darkness, weather, and the teeth beyond camp. Fire is not merely useful. It is emotional architecture. It tells the nervous system that some part of the environment has been bent, briefly and locally, toward human need. A child near flame is not fully safe, but less exposed. An injured person can be kept warmer. Meat from a scavenged carcass can yield more calories and perhaps fewer parasites or pathogens. Though the people themselves do not know those words, wood hardened in flame becomes a more effective point. Smoke alters the air. Ash preserves embers for tomorrow. The world still threatens, but now humans can threaten back in a language the night understands. This is where fear begins to transform into strategy. Not disappear, never that, but reorganize. A camp with fire is planned differently. Fuel matters, dry tinder matters, wind direction matters, sleeping distance matters. Someone must tend the coals. Someone must notice when sparks drift into grass or bedding. Fire punishes carelessness as readily as it punishes predators. It gives safety and demands discipline. That exchange may be one of the oldest foundations of social order. A band that depends on flame must coordinate around maintenance, timing, and caution in new ways. The evidence remains incomplete on exactly how these responsibilities were distributed, but what survives in the record suggests that once fire becomes part of life, it is never just another tool. It is a center. And like all centers in human life, it creates dependence. This is one of the stranger truths hidden beneath the triumphal story of fire. To gain its protection is also to become vulnerable to its loss, in cold or predator-rich landscapes especially. A camp with reliable fire may begin to organize itself around embers as though around a living inheritance. A group that cannot yet kindle flame easily may guard coals across days, carrying them in ash, bark, dung, or other insulating material, treating continuity itself as a survival skill. Rain threatens not only comfort but ignition. Sudden movement threatens not only order but warmth. A fire gone out at the wrong time is not an inconvenience. It can mean exposure, fear, missed sleep, spoiled meat, abandoned camp, or death. There is a quiet irony here. Fire makes humans safer by creating a zone of stability, but it also teaches them how much labor stability requires. Before, darkness was simply endured. Now it must be managed. Fuel must be gathered before dusk. Damp wood must be avoided or dried. Sparks must be watched. Children must be kept back. Caves and overhangs become more attractive in some circumstances because they protect flame, though they also concentrate smoke and carry other risks. Open camps may offer better visibility but less shelter from wind. Every advantage introduces a trade-off. Fire does not abolish uncertainty. It makes humans better at negotiating it while reminding them how easily that negotiation can fail. Its effects on food may be even more revolutionary. Cooking extracts more value from meat and many plant foods, softens fibers, shortens chewing time, and potentially broadens the range of things humans can eat. Some scholars argue that these changes reach deep into human evolution, shaping anatomy, digestion, energy budgets, and social organization. Others urge caution about exactly when and how consistently such benefits become central. No single explanation fully accounts for every step in the process, yet the broad pattern remains persuasive. Fire turns previously marginal calories into more dependable ones. In a world where hunger is a constant teacher, that matters immensely. Roasted tubers, warmed marrow, singed skin stripped more cleanly from carcasses, smoke-dried scraps carried to the next camp. All these small improvements accumulate into stronger bodies, longer attention, better recovery, and perhaps a little more room for planning beyond the next few hours. And planning is part of the transformation. A fire is never only for now, it is always partly for later, for the colder hours ahead, for the return of the hunters, for the child who wakes crying at midnight, for the morning when coals save effort and time. Fire introduces continuity into the most fragile part of the day. It links evening to dawn. That may sound simple, but in evolutionary terms it is extraordinary. A species that once mostly surrendered to darkness begins to carry intention across it. The social consequences are harder to measure and impossible to ignore. Around fire, people can remain together longer in relative safety. Tools can be repaired at night. Food can be divided in light. Injuries can be inspected. Stories, warnings, memory, imitation, and perhaps increasingly complex forms of teaching can continue after sunset. Some researchers have suggested that firelight may have helped deepen social bonds or linguistic development by extending protected interaction time. The evidence can only be indirect, and scholars still debate how confidently such claims can be made. But even the cautious version is powerful enough. Fire keeps people near one another long enough for knowledge to thicken. Yet it also casts a more dramatic light on the darkness beyond. This is another paradox. Once a human group has known the protection of flame, blackness outside the circle may feel more menacing than before, not less. Fire defines an inside and an outside with brutal clarity. Within the glow warmth, faces, smoke, food, relative control. Beyond it, whatever still watches, waits, crawls, or moves under cover of night. The same flame that comforts also sharpens the sense of perimeter. Safety becomes visible because danger has been pushed back, not erased. That sharpened perimeter may have helped humans think differently about place. A campfire creates a center in a way mere co-sleeping on bare ground does not. People orient around it, arrange bodies and objects around it, perhaps assign tasks or status around it. What later becomes hearth, home, household, and domestic space may have very deep roots here. Fire does not just warm a camp, it organizes one. It allows humans to build the first truly intentional microenvironment, a pocket of modified reality inside a hostile or uncertain landscape. Not a house, not yet, but the beginning of one in principle. Still, the fragility never disappears. Fire can burn the camp it protects. It can smoke a cave into misery. It can betray a group's position to rival humans or attract the curious and the desperate. It can fail in wind, rain, or haste. It can consume gathered fuel too fast and force dangerous nighttime foraging. It may not deter every predator equally. A starving carnivore, a bold scavenger, or a pack driven by opportunity may still test the edge. The world does not surrender because a few branches burn. It merely acknowledges a new obstacle. This is why fire changes human psychology without granting human certainty. It becomes the first great demonstration that the world can be altered by skill, and therefore the first great disappointment when alteration proves partial. Humans can make light, but not daylight. They can make warmth, but not summer. They can harden wood, roast flesh, and push back some predators. But they cannot stop the storm, command the herd to return, or keep the river in its bank. Fire is therefore both promise and limit. It teaches power and teaches insufficiency at the same time. That dual lesson may be one of the deepest in human history. Once people experience a tool that changes the structure of danger, they begin to understand that safety can be built, but because fire never solves everything, they also learn that every built safety is conditional. Flame must be fed, shelter can fail, tools can break, alertness can lapse. The world remains dangerous enough to punish overconfidence. Fire gives humans a new confidence, then immediately warns them against trusting it too completely. So the camp gathers close as evening settles. Sparks rise into dark air. The old fear of night eases by a degree, enough for shoulders to relax, enough for food to be shared in something other than haste, enough for children to drift towards sleep without the same raw tension. Outside the light, the world remains what it was, full of cold, weather, predators, and chance. But inside the circle there is a new fact now, one of the most important facts humans have ever made with their own hands. Safety, however fragile, can be constructed, and that discovery changes everything, not because it ends fear, but because it makes fear more complicated. If safety can be built, then its loss becomes more painful. If danger can be reduced, then danger begins to feel less like fate and more like failure when it breaks through. Fire does not end humanity's realization that the world is unsafe. It deepens it. It shows, with every fragile flame, just how much effort it takes to hold chaos back, and how quickly chaos returns when the light goes out. Even after hunger, predators, storm, and darkness have done their work, there remains one more insult the world can deliver, and it may be the most shattering of all. The ground itself can turn traitor. For animals and humans alike, Earth is the final assumption. Trees burn, rivers rise, seasons fail. But beneath all of it lies the old conviction that the land at least will remain where it is. A camp can endure many dangers if the ground holds. Once that certainty breaks, something deeper in the mind changes. The world is no longer merely full of threats. Its foundation has become one of them. A tremor may begin almost invisibly. A cup of pooled water shivers. Dust slips from rock. Birds lift suddenly where no predator has moved. Then comes the hard emotion, the moment when balance itself becomes unreliable. Stone grinds against stone underfoot. Legs fail to trust the very act of standing. A cliff face sheds fragments, then larger blocks. Cracks open across surfaces that were safe a moment before. In narrow valleys and steep ground, landslide follows. In volcanic zones, the earth may not only shake but open its deeper violence. Ash, heat, choking air, strange thunder, darkness in daylight, and animals fleeing before people fully understand what they're fleeing from. There are disasters from which one can run if one begins early enough. There are others that simply arrive inside the act of being alive. For early humans, Such events must have carried a singular force precisely because they are so hard to predict with ordinary sensory skill. A predator leaves signs, a storm builds, hunger accumulates. Even fire, before it is controlled, often announces itself by smoke or dry wind or the panic of animals. An earthquake may give almost nothing proportional to what follows. A slope can hold for years and then fail in minutes. A volcano can rest for generations and then bury whole ecologies in ash. A cave roof can seem permanent until the moment it is not. The evidence remains incomplete when it comes to tying specific prehistoric human populations to particular seismic or volcanic events. But geology makes one broad truth unavoidable. Many human groups across deep time live in landscapes where the Earth itself is unstable. The emotional violence of that instability is easy to underestimate because later humans explain it with tectonics, fault lines, pressure, magma, erosion, saturated soil. Explanation does not remove danger, but it does give danger a frame. Early humans have no such frame. They know only that stone can roar, hills can move, and the familiar can become lethal without warning. In one sense, this is merely another lesson in unpredictability. In another, it is worse than that. It destroys the last refuge of trust. If even the ground is conditional, then no part of the world can be treated as truly passive. There is something important here that goes beyond spectacular catastrophe. Not every group witnesses a massive eruption or a valley-scale collapse. Many may instead live with smaller but still unforgettable events, a falling rock wall after rain, a cave mouth destabilized by freeze and thaw, a slope giving way under foot traffic, a riverbank collapsing beneath the weight of a group gathering water, a patch of crust over hidden mud, or geothermal heat, breaking at the wrong moment. Humans do not need to see the largest disaster imaginable to absorb the lesson. They only need to see Earth behave unlike Earth. And once they do, memory changes again. Places acquire new categories of warning, not simply predator-rich, wind-exposed, or poor in water, but structurally suspect. Do not sleep beneath that overhang after hard rain. Do not trust the steep path when the ground is loose. Do not build too low on a flood-cut bank. Do not stay near the mountain that smokes, not when ash has begun to settle and animals are already moving away. These are not written rules, but they are rules all the same, transmitted through survival and loss. What survives in the archaeological and geological record suggests that humans repeatedly return to certain dangerous zones despite the risks, because such zones can also offer water, game, stone, shelter, or fertile ground. That tension is ancient. The safest place is not always the most livable place. Volcanoes may be the harshest example of this contradiction. Volcanic landscapes can provide rich soils, obsidian, varied ecologies, hot springs, and defensible terrain. They can also erase life at scales almost too large for memory. Ash clouds darken the sky and foul lungs. Water becomes contaminated. Vegetation is buried. Grazers vanish or move. Fine ash settles into every crevice, ruining visibility and making breathing itself a labour. Fires may follow, if heavy rain comes afterward. Mudflows can extend destruction far beyond the eruption zone. Scholars still debate the wider human effects of some famous prehistoric eruptions, and how directly they caused population decline or relocation. No single explanation fully accounts for these outcomes, because human groups differ in mobility, resilience, and geography. But there is little doubt that in places touched by such events, the lesson would have been severe. The land can kill not only through scarcity, but through sudden excess. Flood-linked catastrophe belongs here too. though it wears a different mask. There are river floods, coastal surges, glacial lake outbursts, and flash floods born from distant weather no one in the camp can see. Each teaches a related truth. Terrain that feels stable can become a moving force. A dry basin can become a trap. A route can disappear. Children, tools, food stores, and the injured can all be lost not to an enemy, but to momentum. The body understands such danger differently. One can fight a predator, at least briefly. One cannot meaningfully fight a wall of water or a collapsing slope. Catastrophe on this scale teaches helplessness in a more concentrated form. That helplessness may be one of the reasons these events echo so long in group memory. A lion attack is terrifying but legible. Someone was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the predator was bolder than expected, or the group was tired, or dusk came too fast. A quake or landslide can make every good decision irrelevant in seconds. A camp may have chosen shelter, conserved energy, kept close, read the sky correctly, and still be destroyed. That is a different kind of wound, because it severs the old alliance between prudence and survival. Humans can accept danger more easily than meaninglessness, but the earth moving under their feet introduces exactly that possibility. There is a lesser-known but important archaeological difficulty here. Catastrophes do not always leave neat human stories behind. They may destroy sites, bury them, scatter them, or leave signatures that are hard to separate from ordinary abandonment. A missing occupation layer may reflect migration, death, preservation bias, or some combination of all three. This uncertainty matters. It reminds us not to force the past into melodrama. Yet uncertainty itself does not erase the role of disaster. On the contrary, the geological record is full of violent episodes that human beings living nearby could not have ignored. Even if we cannot always name the victims, the world that produced them was real. What makes such events transformative is not just the immediate death toll, it is what happens after. A landslide blocks a route to water, an ashfall alters grazing and browsing patterns. A flood strips topsoil or leaves behind new wetlands that attract different animals and different dangers. A quake collapses a shelter once trusted. The disaster ends, but its rearrangement remains. Humans are then forced to confront not only terror, but reorientation. The map in the mind no longer matches the map underfoot. A valley can become less passable. A stream can shift course. New cliffs appear. Old caves close. Resources once counted on are buried, cut off, or transformed. The world does not simply hurt people, it edits itself. That editing has profound consequences for memory. Memory is strongest when the world repeats. It weakens when place itself is rewritten. Elders may remember the old route, the old shelter, the old spring, but remembrance now carries a painful addendum: it is gone. This may be one of the deepest prehistoric sources of human melancholy, though the word is too modern and too literary. Better to say that people begin to know loss not only as the death of individuals, but as the death of places. A familiar overhang collapses and takes with it not just stone, but a piece of continuity. A crossing disappears and the old path becomes only a story. Landscape itself becomes mortal. And once landscape becomes mortal, so does confidence in permanence. That confidence may never have been absolute, but catastrophe strips away whatever remains of it. People begin to choose camp with a different seriousness. High ground matters more, but not every high ground is stable. Caves offer shelter, but not every cave roof can be trusted. River margins provide water, but not every margin deserves a sleeping place. The search for safety becomes more sophisticated because the world has offered a more sophisticated threat. It is no longer enough to avoid the obvious predator trail. One must also read slope, drainage, stone, smoke, and ground texture, all while knowing that even correct reading may fail. This is where caution becomes layered. Hunger taught humans that absence can kill. Predators taught them that the margins are watched. Weather taught them that the sky and darkness can turn hostile. Catastrophe teaches that even the inert may awaken. Together, these lessons form a more total understanding of danger than any one of them could alone. The world is not unsafe because of one enemy. It is unsafe because instability runs through every level of it. From sky to river to grass to claw to stone. And yet humans survive this too, which may be the strangest fact of all. They survive not because they become invulnerable, but because they absorb disaster into culture. They remember unstable places. They read animal flight more carefully. They treat smoking mountains, cracked ground, and fresh fallen stone with inherited suspicion. They abandon camps more quickly after warning signs. They seek higher ground where they can. They improvise, mourn, move, and continue. Disaster does not end humanity. It teaches humanity to distrust stillness. So when the earth moves, or the mountain darkens, or the slope suddenly pours downward in a river of stone and soil, something ancient inside human thought shifts with it. This is no longer a world where danger merely enters from outside. Danger can emerge from beneath the feet, from the sheltering wall, from the familiar hill, from the ground that held every step of childhood. Once that knowledge takes root, there can be no full return to the older innocence. The planet has shown its deeper face, and it is not dependable. After that, a campfire feels smaller than before, a cave less absolute, a valley less intimate. People still need all these things, but they need them with a new reserve of doubt. Safety must be searched for, built, guarded, and revised, because the world has now made one final point with terrible clarity. Not even the earth promises to stay where it is. After the catastrophe itself comes the harder education. The shaking ends, the flood withdraws, the fire burns out or moves on, the slope settles into stillness, ash stops falling, wind clears the air enough to see again, and then the survivors walk through what remains. It is in this aftermath, perhaps even more than in the moment of terror, that the world teaches its most intimate lesson. Danger has passed through, but it has left evidence. Bodies lie where no bodies should be. Bones appear in places that do not fit the ordinary grammar of life. A camp once arranged around heat, sleep, food, and habit has been stripped into fragments. Here is a broken tool far from its maker. There, a child's footprint ending at water-scoured stone. Further off, the half-buried curve of a rib cage where there should have been only reeds. Human beings are pattern readers, and the aftermath of disaster is a pattern shattered into clues. In ordinary death there is a sequence people can understand. The old weaken, the wounded fail. The one taken by a predator leaves blood, drag marks, scattered signs of struggle. Even sudden attacks usually belong to a logic, but catastrophe and exposure produce stranger scenes. A body can be found under stone with no predator prints nearby. Bones can wash far from flesh. A skull can appear alone in silt where no one lived. Limbs can be separated from skeletons not by deliberate violence, but by current, scavenging, collapse, weather, time. To later archaeology, this becomes taphonomy, the study of how remains are altered after death. To early humans, it is something simpler and more brutal. The world can unmake a person after killing them. That matters, because the dead are not just evidence of loss, they're evidence of how loss happens. A cleanly broken bone may tell of a fall or impact. Tooth marks on a femur may reveal that predators or scavengers came after the event, or perhaps during it. Bodies lying together suggest one story. Bodies isolated across ground suggest another. What survives in the prehistoric record often comes to us in such fragments, and scholars still debate how much can safely be inferred from many sites. The evidence remains incomplete. Preservation is selective, and absence can mislead as easily as presence. Yet one broad truth is difficult to escape. Ancient humans lived among the remains of other humans often enough to learn from them. That learning would not have been abstract. It would have been immediate, practical, and emotionally charged. A skeleton near a steep path teaches caution about the slope. Bones at the edge of reeds teach suspicion of the water crossing. A shattered camp beneath fallen rock teaches what overhead shelter can suddenly become. Even where flesh is gone and only partial remains survive, the placement itself matters. Humans are unusually sensitive to the meaning of bodies. Long before formal burial becomes common or standardized, there is likely already an awareness that the dead should be somewhere, and that when they are elsewhere, something has gone badly wrong. The wrong place becomes part of the warning. This is where the landscape begins to fill not only with resources and threats, but with memory traces fixed to particular points. A certain bend in the river is remembered because someone was taken there. A certain cave mouth is avoided because rock came down after rain. A low basin is recalled because floodwater trapped the camp. In many later human cultures, dangerous places gather story. It is tempting to project too much of that back into deep prehistory, and caution is necessary. But no single explanation fully accounts for the power of place memory in human beings without recognizing that disaster leaves narrative anchors. Bones are among the strongest of them. There is also something uniquely disturbing about silence after catastrophe. A familiar camp should sound a certain way. Tools striking stone, low voices, children restless at dawn, crackle of embers, scavengers at a distance if meat is being processed. After disaster, that expected noise may be gone. Silence becomes a clue as much as scattered objects do. The silence of abandonment is different from the silence of caution. It is spacious, wrong, and often temporary. Because before long the other consumers of the landscape arrive. Hyenas, vultures, insects, rodents, dogs, foxes, crows, beetles. All the quiet workers of reduction begin their own reading of the scene. Early humans watching them would have seen something both useful and terrible. The land wastes nothing, not even their own kind. That harsh fact may deepen the emotional weight of body recovery where recovery is possible. To retrieve the dead quickly is not only an act of attachment, it is resistance against the world's appetite. Yet retrieval is not always possible. A flood may carry bodies beyond reach. A predator-rich area may become too dangerous to search thoroughly. A slope may remain unstable. Fire may destroy what cannot be reached. In those cases, the lesson is harder still. Not everyone can be brought back. Not every death can be closed. Some are simply absorbed into terrain. A valley, a ravine, a waterhole, a mud bank becomes in effect a grave without ceremony. There is a lesser-known detail hidden in many archaeological discussions of early human sites. Not all bone accumulations are straightforward evidence of living space. Some places preserve mixed traces of occupation, predation, scavenging, and natural deposition so tangled that even modern specialists struggle to untangle cause from aftermath. Human bones among animal bones. cut marks beside tooth marks, burned fragments mixed with unburned, bodies inside caves used by both people and carnivores across time. All of this suggests that the boundary between camp and kill site is not always clean. Sometimes humans are the users of a place. Sometimes they are part of what the place has consumed. That ambiguity itself would have been a lesson. A shelter may also become a trap. A refuge may hold the record of previous failure. When bones are found in the wrong places, they teach in another way too. They reveal scale. One death may be misfortune. Several in one zone suggest pattern. Repeated remains near a crossing, cliff edge, predator corridor, or floodplain transform anecdote into rule. The group no longer remembers only a person. It remembers a category of place. This may be one of the earliest roots of taboo-like thinking, not necessarily in the spiritual sense first, but in the survival sense. Do not go there lightly. Do not camp there if the sky is wrong. Do not let children stray there. The land becomes marked not by signs humans install, but by consequences humans witness. The aftermath of predation leaves its own distinctive record. Drag marks into cover, bone clusters under shade, gnawing concentrated on nutrient-rich ends, scat containing fragments of the consumed, perhaps, at times, the unsettling recognition of a familiar person reduced to the same pattern as other prey. This is not merely grief, it is a revelation about status in the world. Humans can dress wounds, carry fire, shape stone, share food, and still end as bones in another creature's den. That is a difficult thing for any intelligence to absorb without becoming more vigilant. The world is not just dangerous because it may kill. It is dangerous because it can convert a person into evidence for others. And that evidence, once seen, is remembered by children too. A child who glimpses bones at a water edge or hears adults speak in altered tones around a place is being taught something older than formal instruction. Memory enters not only through words, but through posture, route choice, hesitation, the way adults suddenly draw the young closer in one location and not another. This is how danger becomes inherited without writing. The landscape is read aloud through behavior. The dead continue teaching long after they are gone. There is also an important contrast between ordinary camps and abandoned ones. A living camp has order, even if rough order. Tools cluster where they are used. Waste lies where processing happens. Hearths organize space. Sleeping places show repeated habit. An abandoned camp emptied by planned movement may still preserve a logic. But a camp broken by surprise leaves another signature altogether. Items dropped mid-task, food left half-processed, fire pits deserted without care, objects too valuable to leave behind still left. To later archaeologists, such patterns can hint at rapid departure or crisis. To the survivors returning, the meaning would be immediate. Whatever happened here overcame routine so quickly that even necessity was interrupted. This may be one reason abandoned camps feel uncanny even now when modern people encounter traces of interrupted life. The emotion has deep roots. Humans expect inhabited spaces to follow human intention. When intention is suddenly absent, the mind fills the gap with alarm. In prehistory, that alarm is often warranted. An abandoned camp may signal disease, predator attack, flood, intergroup violence, or environmental failure. It says that a place once held by people has been released back to hazard. That release is itself a warning. Over time, these scenes accumulate into a darker knowledge. The world no longer teaches only through direct danger. It teaches through leftovers, through what remains after the danger has moved on. A broken spear point in mud says one thing, a scatter of cracked bones says another. A trampled hearth under silt, says another still. Humans begin to understand that the aftermath contains its own kind of map, one drawn in damage rather than in resources. To survive, they must learn to read both. This dual reading may help explain why humans become so attentive to traces in general. Not just tracks of live animals, but signs of what happened recently in a place. Fresh fallen rock, churned mud, unusual scavenger concentration, burned patches, silence, odour, bone whiteness versus freshness. All of it becomes information. The record suggests increasing sophistication in exactly this kind of environmental literacy, though it can be difficult to isolate from the general intelligence humans already possessed. Still, the principle stands. The more dangerous the world reveals itself to be, the more vital it becomes to read not just the present, but the immediate past. And perhaps that is the deeper meaning of bones in the wrong places. They are not simply reminders that death occurs. They are proof that the world can rearrange life violently and leave behind clues for those willing to notice. In that sense, the dead become unwilling participants in the education of the living. Their remains warn, instruct, redirect, and sharpen caution. This is a terrible inheritance, but an inheritance all the same. So the survivors move carefully through the damaged ground, gathering what can be carried, noting what must be avoided, and understanding more than before without needing to say it plainly. The world has shown one more of its methods. It does not merely threaten the living, it writes its lessons onto the dead. And once humans begin to read those lessons, the landscape changes again. It is no longer only the place where life unfolds, it is also an archive of what life cannot survive. Once danger repeats often enough, memory stops being merely personal, it becomes infrastructure. A single person can remember where a predator waited, where the flood reached, where the cliff gave way, where water lingered longest in a dry year. But one person dies, or wanders off, or forgets, and the warning dies with them unless it has been lodged somewhere beyond the individual body. This is one of the quiet revolutions in the human story. Long before writing, long before formal law, long before maps scratched into clay or ink pressed onto parchment, people begin building a social memory of danger. It may be the earliest durable technology humans ever create that leaves almost no material trace. At first, that memory is practical and local. Do not cross there after heavy rain. Do not sleep beneath that shelf of rock. Do not approach that water at dusk. Do not waste strength chasing the herd beyond the broken ridge when the wind comes from the east. Such knowledge is not dramatic, but it is exactly the sort of thing that keeps a group alive. What survives in the record suggests that much of prehistoric survival depends not on spectacular innovation, but on the dependable transfer of these small, situational truths. A species living inside unstable climates, exposed camps, predator corridors, and uneven resources cannot afford to rediscover every hazard from the beginning. This is where the old figure of the elder changes importance. Earlier, the elder is an archive of roots, seasons, food sources, and animal behavior. Now that same person may also become an archive of rare danger. The dry year before the children were born, the slope that failed after unseasonal rain, the valley where no one camps anymore, the spring that keeps water longest but only if approached from the high side because of the crocodiles. Scholars still debate how precisely such roles should be reconstructed for the deep past, because no single burial or campsite announces the social status of a memory keeper. Yet the evidence remains incomplete in a way that cuts both directions. The absence of writing does not mean the absence of complex knowledge. On the contrary, In mobile worlds, oral and behavioral storage may be the only possible form of long-term planning. And memory is not passed on only through speech. It moves through gesture, route choice, timing, and correction. A child reaches toward a place and is pulled back sharply. A young hunter wants to follow spoor into reeds and is redirected with unmistakable urgency. A group turns away from what looks like good shelter because someone older has reasons not visible to the inexperienced eye. Repetition turns such moments into instinctive caution. One does not always know the original story behind a warning. One obeys it because those who do know carry the tone of certainty that survival has taught them. That tone may be one of humanity's earliest moral voices, not morality in the later philosophical sense, but in the older, harder sense of what one must and must not do if others are to remain alive. Keep the child close, share the warning, watch while others sleep, feed the fire, tell the truth about what you saw at the water, return before dark. The beginnings of social discipline may emerge as much from shared danger as from shared affection. When the world is unsafe, irresponsibility becomes expensive. A person who ignores known risks does not endanger only themselves. They may draw predators toward camp, waste strength the group cannot spare, or lead others into scarcity or flood. Memory, therefore, becomes collective obligation. This is also the stage at which ritual caution may begin to take shape, even in forms too early and too fluid to call religion in any later sense. Humans are pattern-loving creatures, and repeated danger invites repeated response. Certain routes may be approached in certain ways. Camps may be arranged according to habits whose original reason later blurs, but whose practical value endures. Particular times of day may come with automatic restraint. Fire may be treated with the degree of care that is part technical discipline, part emotional reverence. Bodies may be placed or handled according to rules born first from predator avoidance, hygiene, grief, or place memory, then hardened into tradition. No single explanation fully accounts for the emergence of ritualized behavior, but danger almost certainly feeds it. Repetition under risk tends to become custom. That custom matters because memory on its own is fragile. People forget, they embellish, they die. But custom can hold even when explanation weakens. A group may no longer remember who was lost at a particular crossing. Only that one does not cross it in the dark. They may no longer recall the first fire that escaped and burned bedding or brush. Only that embers are always banked this way and children are never allowed too near. In this sense, culture begins to store hazard in compressed form. A rule survives even when the event that created it has faded. What later humans will call tradition may, at least in part, be accumulated survival knowledge disguised as ordinary habit. There is a darker side to this process. Memory does not always preserve accuracy. In unpredictable environments, humans may connect the wrong sign to the wrong consequence, avoid places that are merely unlucky, or attach fear to features that only resemble past danger. The nervous system prefers a false positive to a fatal miss. A grove that stood near an attack may be treated with suspicion long after the actual cause had nothing to do with the trees. A storm following a certain animal movement may create an association where none truly exists. The evidence remains incomplete on how such cognitive habits shape the deep past, but the principle is almost unavoidable. A species trying to survive under uncertainty will often remember too much rather than too little. And yet overcaution can be costly too. Avoid too many water sources, too many valleys, too many sheltering places, and the range of survival narrows dangerously. This is why memory must be social rather than purely emotional. A frightened individual might shun a whole region forever. A group can compare outcomes, weigh necessity, and revise rules. That ability to negotiate between fear and evidence may be one of the deepest advantages of human cooperation. Humans do not merely inherit warnings. They argue with them in action. They test them, break them, refine them, and teach the refined version onward. Culture is not only accumulation, it is calibration. This may also be where language, however developed or undeveloped in any particular period, becomes especially consequential. The more precisely a danger can be described, the more efficiently it can be transmitted without each person paying for the lesson directly. A gesture toward a slope is useful. A detailed recounting of what happened after the last heavy rain is better. A warning about a river that rises after distant storms beyond visible hills requires some ability to communicate causes not present in the immediate scene. Scholars still debate the timing and texture of fully modern language, and caution is necessary. But no matter where one draws that line, human communication clearly becomes one of the great shields against repeated hazard. The ability to speak of what is absent, what happened before, and what may happen again is itself a survival tool. One of the lesser-known implications of this is that memory can travel farther than bodies. A group entering new terrain may carry warnings from another landscape that help them interpret unfamiliar one. A people accustomed to flash floods may read dry channels differently even in a region where floods behave otherwise. Experience with predator-rich reeds in one valley may sharpen caution around similar cover elsewhere. Sometimes such transferred knowledge will help, sometimes it will mislead. But in either case, it marks a profound change. Humans are no longer simply reacting to danger when it appears. They are arriving prepared by stories from places not currently in view. The camp itself becomes a memory machine. The location of the hearth, the placement of sleeping bodies, the order in which tasks are done at dusk, the way tools are stacked, the habit of keeping children inward and the strongest outward, all of it stores previous lessons. None of these arrangements is random for long. Each solves a problem once encountered. Why sit with backs to stone here but not there? Why keep a second route out of the cave? Why place fuel above the damp ground? Why move camp earlier than comfort demands when the sky has a certain look? The answers may not always be spoken, but they are embodied in routine. This embodiment creates one of the strange strengths of human life. People can survive knowledge they do not consciously possess because the group around them already acts it out. A child need not understand flash flood hydrology to learn that adults leave dry channels fast when distant thunder is heard. A youth need not fully grasp predator behavior to copy the rule about not approaching carcasses alone. Over generations, this makes culture a kind of extended nervous system, carrying signals across time. One person's terror becomes many people's precaution. And perhaps this is the deepest step so far in humanity's realization that the world is unsafe. The danger is no longer only felt in the moment of threat. It is expected in advance and organized against communally. That expectation changes consciousness. A people who preserve warning are a people who assume the future can resemble the worst of the past. Hope remains, certainly. So does routine, laughter, hunger, affection, exhaustion, and the 1,000 ordinary acts of surviving another day. But under all of it lies something more enduring now: anticipation. The world has become a place not merely to move through, but to remember against. There are consequences to living this way. Memory can save lives, but it also enlarges the shadow of past suffering. The child who never saw the slope collapse still grows up around adults who hesitate at fresh cracks after rain. The young woman who never watched a companion vanish in flood still hears the change in tone when elders speak of certain crossings. The hunter who never lost a sibling to a predator still learns to feel exposed in silence near reeds. Fear, in this sense, becomes hereditary without entering the blood. It travels through behavior. That inheritance may be one of humanity's oldest burdens and oldest achievements at once. It burdens because it keeps alive the weight of old disasters. It achieves because it spares new bodies from paying every lesson in full. The world remains unsafe, but it is now encountered through a filter built by generations who already know something of its tricks. This does not eliminate catastrophe, scarcity, or chance. It does mean that survival increasingly depends on how well the living can carry the dead, the absent, and the nearly forgotten inside ordinary habit. So the band moves through mourning with more than tools in hand. It moves with the invisible company of previous seasons, previous losses, previous narrow escapes. The route taken is shaped by those who are no longer there. The places avoided are crowded with memory, though they look empty. The warnings given to children are old even when freshly spoken. In this way, human beings begin to build a second landscape on top of the first, not of stone and water and grass, but of remembered danger. And once that invisible landscape exists, the world can never again be only what the eyes see in front of them. Children born into such a world do not experience danger as revelation. They breathe it from the beginning. By the time they can walk with confidence, the adults around them have already arranged life in ways shaped by old losses, old near misses, old disciplines that no longer need explanation every day. The child learns where to sleep, where not to wander, when to stay silent, how close to sit to the fire, how to move near water, which older faces signal calm and which signal immediate obedience. Before memory becomes narrative, it becomes atmosphere. In that sense, each new generation grows up inside accumulated caution long before it understands why caution exists. This changes childhood at its foundation. In safer worlds, if such a thing ever truly exists, children can treat the environment as background to development. In the older human world, the environment is itself one of the first teachers. Ground can cut, water can take, darkness can hide, weather can break, animals can test, food can fail, play may still flourish, because children are human and curiosity does not vanish under pressure, but play is less insulated from consequence. Running too far, climbing too carelessly, straying at dusk, handling fire without discipline, all of these can turn quickly from error into injury or death. The line between learning and danger is therefore thin, and adults have good reason to watch it with fierce attention. What survives in ethnographic comparison and evolutionary reasoning suggests that childhood in mobile foraging societies often includes both great freedom and serious competence. But those freedoms are never unlimited. They are structured by an environment that demands early awareness. A child may learn plant knowledge, tracking, tool use, route memory, or signs of weather not as specialized education, but as part of ordinary belonging. In a more unstable world, that process becomes more urgent. There is less space for prolonged ignorance. The evidence remains incomplete on how exactly these pressures vary across different prehistoric populations. But no single explanation fully accounts for human developmental flexibility without recognizing the role of risk. Children are not merely protected from danger, they are trained toward it. That training is physical, emotional, and social all at once. Physically, the young body learns terrain, how to place feet on loose slopes, how to feel for stability, how to move quietly when quiet matters, how to carry small loads, how to conserve warmth near others, how to read the sharp edge between safe curiosity and foolish exposure. Emotionally, the child learns the tones of alarm and reassurance, the difference between ordinary adult caution and the rarer, colder urgency that means immediate compliance. Socially, the child learns dependence not as weakness, but as structure. No one moves entirely alone. Eyes are shared, warning is shared, food, when available, is shared. The child grows up in a web of attention because outside that web the world is too eager to punish small mistakes. And this is where uncertainty begins to sink deeper into human life. The child is not only taught specific dangers, the child is taught that conditions can change. A stream that was shallow yesterday may be dangerous today. A route used last season may not hold this season. A place once rich in food may now be barren or already contested by animals or other humans. This matters because it produces a mind prepared not just for threat, but for revision. The world cannot be trusted to remain the same. Early exposure to that fact may help explain something essential about humanity. People do not merely learn rules. They learn to expect that rules may fail at the edges. Such an upbringing has consequences for attachment and family life. In dangerous environments, closeness is not only emotional comfort, it is infrastructure. Infants are carried because distance kills. Older children are monitored because the margin between camp and hazard may be only a few steps. Sleep is organized not for privacy, but for access. The weak are placed where help can reach them quickly. The strong or most alert may position themselves outward. Care is spatial before it is sentimental in any modern literary sense. The arrangement of bodies at night is one of the earliest defenses humans make against a hostile world. This does not mean prehistoric family life is cold or purely strategic. On the contrary, prolonged human childhood would make little sense without deep bonds of care. The human young are unusually dependent for unusually long periods, and that fact alone implies forms of tenderness, patience, protection, and teaching older than agriculture, older than cities, older perhaps than our own species in its present form. But danger changes the texture of that care. Love must become vigilant. Affection must become logistical. To keep a child alive is not simply to feed and soothe, it is to anticipate the world's next attempt. There is a harsh arithmetic in this. Children are both the future of the group and one of its greatest vulnerabilities. They move unpredictably, make noise, tire suddenly, misjudge distance, and notice interesting things before they notice dangerous ones. They also demand calories, protection, and time in a world where all three may be scarce. A dangerous environment therefore makes human cooperation more necessary, because raising children well under such conditions is too much for isolated individuals. Alloparenting, shared attention, older siblings carrying responsibility, elders contributing knowledge and supervision. All of this may become not only socially desirable but structurally necessary. Scholars still debate how different prehistoric lifeways distributed childcare, because the archaeological record tells these stories only indirectly. Yet what survives in anatomy, energetics, and comparative study points strongly toward one conclusion. The human family is shaped as much by risk as by reproduction. As each generation grows up under these conditions, the ordinary emotional setting of life may shift. Not constant terror, because constant terror is unsustainable and would itself destroy functioning, but a kind of baseline alertness, a readiness to interrupt rest, a habit of scanning horizons and margins, a quick response to unusual sound, a preference for keeping options open, a dislike of being trapped without visibility or escape. Much of modern human behavior still carries traces of this. though civilization has layered over it with walls, institutions, and technologies, people still startle at sudden movement, still feel exposed in open darkness, still check exits in unfamiliar places, still sleep differently depending on the sense of security around them. These tendencies are not proof of a single prehistoric origin, but they are consistent with long lives lived under watchful uncertainty. Children also inherit a strange double lesson from adults. On one hand, they are taught competence. Learn this path. Carry this ember carefully. Watch the birds before you approach water. On the other hand, they are taught humility toward the world. Do not assume. Do not become careless because yesterday was calm. Do not believe abundance means safety. Do not trust a cave only because it sheltered you once. This double lesson may be one of the oldest foundations of human intelligence. Confidence in skill, distrust of certainty. It produces capable people who nevertheless expect surprise. Lesser-known evidence from developmental studies in recent traditional societies suggests that children can acquire impressive environmental knowledge very early when daily life demands it. Again, such comparisons must be used cautiously and not treated as perfect windows into the deep past. Even so, they remind us that the prehistoric child is not passive material waiting for adulthood. The child is already a participant in the group's relationship with risk, watching, carrying, fetching, imitating, staying within sight, learning the sound of weather and the smell of smoke and the difference between safe flame and dangerous flame. All of it begins long before full strength arrives. Yet there is a cost to growing up inside uncertainty. It may compress innocence, not eliminate wonder, because wonder is also ancient, but shorten the period in which wonder can remain unconcerned with consequence. A child can still marvel at tracks, birds, insects, distant stormlight, the colour of rock after rain, the warmth of fur, the power of flame. But wonder is quickly braided with caution. Beautiful water can drown. Interesting bones may lie where predators return. A cliff edge offers a view and a fall. Night sounds can fascinate and terrify within the same breath. The world is never merely one thing. That complexity may help form the adult human mind in a very particular way. Adults raised under repeated uncertainty become harder to surprise in small matters and more sensitive to larger shifts. They learn to live with incompleteness. They do not demand full information before acting because full information rarely arrives. Instead, they weigh clues, trust some memories, question others, and move anyway. This is not ideal safety. It is adaptive psychology for unstable conditions. One could argue that much of later human reasoning, practical, political, even spiritual, still bears the shape of minds accustomed to choosing under partial knowledge. Family structure, too, becomes marked by this inheritance. Pair bonds, sibling ties, kin alliances, and group loyalties are all strained and strengthened by shared exposure. Those who endure storms together, hunger together, carry children together, bury or mourn together, and keep watch through dangerous nights together become not merely associated but interdependent in the deepest sense. The world outside the social unit is uncertain enough that the unit itself takes on extraordinary value. Safety becomes less a property of place than of coordinated people. Home, before it means walls, may first mean the cluster of known bodies who react correctly when danger comes. And because children see all of this before they can fully interpret it, they absorb the emotional logic of human life at a very deep level. Stay close to those who know, watch the watchers, follow the tone before you understand the reason, trust the group more than the landscape, expect change, Expect scarcity to return. Expect night to matter. Expect that some places are not what they seem. These are not explicit doctrines. They are habits of mind laid down through repetition. By adulthood, they may feel like common sense, which is precisely why they endure. This is the true meaning of becoming children of uncertainty. A generation no longer meets danger as isolated events. It meets danger as the assumed condition beneath ordinary life. That assumption does not make people weaker. In many ways, it makes them more resilient, more adaptable, more capable of fast response and social coordination. But it also leaves a residue. The world is no longer a place that can be trusted simply because one has survived it so far. Survival itself becomes evidence only of temporary success. So the children around the fire grow, and as they grow they inherit more than tools and routes and techniques. They inherit posture, they inherit timing, they inherit vigilance, they inherit the quiet reserve with which adults study the weather, the water, the slope, the dark, the silence after birds abruptly rise. They inherit a way of being human shaped by the suspicion that safety is never final. And when those children become adults in turn, they will not need to be told that the world is unsafe. They will already have been informed by living as though it always was. By the time humans begin to fear one another in a more organized way, the world has already taught them almost everything needed to do harm. Watch the margins, move quietly, read weakness, protect access to water, use high ground, strike when the other is tired, scattered, hungry, or surprised. None of these lessons begin as social cruelty. They begin as survival against predators, weather, scarcity, and unstable ground. But once resources tighten, routes overlap, and different groups meet under pressure, the knowledge turns inward. Danger no longer comes only from tooth, flood, darkness, or failing season. It arrives standing upright, carrying the same alert eyes, the same grasp of terrain, the same desperate need to go on living. It is important to be careful here. Prehistory should not be flattened into a grim parade of constant human violence. The evidence does not support such simplicity. Much of human life, even under difficult conditions, depends on tolerance, avoidance, exchange, borrowing, imitation, pair bonding across bands, and the practical recognition that other humans can be useful, not only dangerous. There are likely long stretches of coexistence, cautious encounters at distance, silent withdrawals, shared use of landscapes separated by timing rather than battle, and perhaps moments of outright cooperation impossible for us to recover. Scholars still debate the prevalence and nature of early intergroup conflict because the record is uneven, the signs ambiguous, and not every wound leaves a readable skeleton. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for human behavior under scarcity without admitting a harder truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing near a water source is another group that needs the same water. This possibility changes the emotional map of the world in a new way. Predators are one kind of threat, storms another, but other humans are unsettling precisely because they are so similar. They can anticipate. They can observe a camp from concealment. They can read smoke. They can follow tracks. They understand fatigue, panic, and the value of timing because they live under the same conditions. An animal may stalk by instinct sharpened through evolution. A human can stalk with memory, inference, and intention. That makes encounter more ambiguous than any predator sign. A distant figure on a ridge may mean nothing. It may mean shared knowledge, trade, mating opportunity, news of better ground. It may also mean competition, theft, abduction, or attack. The uncertainty itself becomes part of the danger. There is a brutal logic to how this emerges. In easy times, overlapping territories may be manageable. One band uses a valley in early season, another later. A coast is broad enough for several groups to gather shellfish without direct confrontation. A migration route is rich enough that hunters can spread out. But when drought shrinks water, when prey becomes irregular, when storms cut off old corridors, when fire or flood or changing vegetation compress movement into fewer reliable refugees, proximity stops being neutral. Two hungry groups arriving at the same spring are not meeting as abstract members of a species. They are arriving as bodies under pressure, carrying children, elders, injuries, and expectations that may have no room left for generosity. What survives in the record suggests that some of the same places most attractive for life are also the places most likely to force human encounter river mouths, cave systems, obsidian sources, hunting bottlenecks, upland passes, dependable springs, coastal shelves rich in food, sheltered valleys during seasonal extremes. These are not only ecological magnets, they are social collision points. A group reaching such a place may find old ash, recent tracks, butchered bone, unfamiliar tool fragments, dung not left by local animals, snapped branches at human height, or the faint geometry of another camp once set where one hoped to settle. The landscape now contains a new kind of evidence, not only what animals have done here, but what people have done. And people leave behind a particular kind of unease because they are unpredictable in more layered ways than weather or predators. A lion does not negotiate. A flood does not bluff. Other humans may do both in forms prehistoric bands can feel without formal diplomacy. They may approach openly or remain hidden. They may signal distance or hold silence. They may be exhausted and avoid contact or desperate enough to risk it. They may include kin by marriage, familiar faces from rare earlier meetings, or complete strangers whose intentions must be guessed from posture alone. The world has always required reading signs. Now it demands reading minds from almost nothing. That demand likely changes group behavior even before violence occurs. Camps may conceal themselves more carefully in some regions. Fires may be kept smaller or better sheltered when strangers are suspected nearby. Movement may shift to less obvious routes. Lookouts become more valuable. Children are kept closer not only because of predators, but because people can take what predators cannot use. Tools may be carried more often rather than left in camp. Food processing may be hurried or relocated. The evidence remains incomplete and should not be exaggerated into a universal prehistoric paranoia. But the logic is hard to escape. Once humans recognize other humans as possible threats, ordinary routine acquires another layer of caution. This recognition may have deeper roots than open conflict itself. Even without fighting, simply knowing that another band can reach the same refuge, consume the same shell bed, intercept the same migration, or occupy the same cave before you do is enough to alter strategy. Scarcity becomes social long before it becomes violent. The waterhole is not only shrinking, it may be claimed. The herd route is not only shifting, others may already be waiting at the new crossing. A cave is not only safe from rain, it may already hold a fire not your own. In that sense, rival human presence transforms uncertainty into competition, even when spears remain lowered. And when violence does occur, its meaning is especially severe because it feels like the collapse of the last possible refuge. Nature was always dangerous. The group was what stood against it. If danger can also come from another human group, then safety is no longer merely a matter of reading the land correctly. It depends on alliances, numbers, timing, and luck in meeting or avoiding people whose intentions cannot be known in advance. Home shrinks inward. Trust becomes more selective. Identity hardens around those inside the circle, because outside the circle may now contain minds as capable as one's own and less inclined to mercy. There are hints of this hardening in the deep past, though they must be handled carefully. Skeletal trauma that may reflect interpersonal violence, defensive use of difficult terrain, repeated occupation of sheltered or elevated sites with good visibility, patterns suggesting territoriality around key resources, evidence of long-distance movement that may represent both mobility and displacement. None of these signs tells a single, clean story. Scholars still debate whether some injuries reflect accidents, hunting damage, animal attack, or human conflict, and they debate how much later ethnographic analogy can illuminate the remote past. That caution is necessary. But caution does not erase the possibility that repeated human contact under stress sometimes ends badly enough to leave a lasting mark on memory. There is also the question of other kinds of humans. For much of prehistory, modern humans are not alone on the planet. Other hominin groups exist in different regions and sometimes overlapping ones. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps others less clearly known from fragmentary evidence are part of the same broader human story. Their encounters with one another are still the subject of intense study and debate. We know there was interbreeding in at least some cases. We know there are overlapping territories and shifting populations. What we do not know in detail is the emotional texture of those meetings, how often they were peaceful, tense, indifferent, or violent. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet even the possibility adds another layer to the ancient realization that danger can wear a familiar outline while still remaining profoundly unknown. Lesser-known details from archaeology complicate the picture in useful ways. Similar tool styles can spread without conquest. Distinct groups can occupy the same region at different times without ever seeing each other. Genetic mixing can occur through rare contact rather than continual coexistence. In other words, the past does not support a simple myth of endless tribal war. Still, neither does it support a dream of frictionless harmony. The truth is likely more uncomfortable and more human. Long intervals of avoidance, cautious coexistence, opportunistic exchange, and occasional violence, all shaped by local conditions, climate strain, demography, and the plain hard fact of overlapping need. That hard fact teaches another difficult lesson. Other humans are dangerous not because they are evil in some abstract sense, but because they are also trying to survive. Their children are hungry too. Their elders remember safer seasons too. Their campfire also represents work, fear, and fragile security. This symmetry does not soften danger, it intensifies it. A predator may break off an attack if conditions change. Another group may calculate more coldly because they understand exactly what your weakness means. They know what a small fire suggests about fuel shortage. They know what silence suggests about dwindling food. They know how far an injured person can walk and how slowly a band with infants must move. For the human mind, this may be one of the most unsettling recognitions of all. The world does not merely contain blind danger and indifferent force, it also contains rival intention. Someone else can see your shelter the way you see theirs. Someone else can guess your needs. Someone else can plan around them. Once that realization settles, the psychological architecture of safety changes again. Watchfulness is no longer aimed only outward into the non-human world. It begins to include social reading, suspicion of strange smoke, caution at unfamiliar tracks, and faster judgments about whether contact is worth the risk. Children grow up within this shift too. They learn not to run toward every distant human shape in simple curiosity. They watch adult faces before deciding whether a stranger means relief or alarm. They understand that voices not belonging to the group can draw attention, but not always the right kind. Women, men, the elderly, adolescents, all may carry different vulnerabilities in such encounters, though the specifics almost certainly vary across time and place. The record does not let us reduce these dynamics to one formula. It does suggest, however, that group cohesion becomes even more important when threat may come from socially intelligent outsiders. This is perhaps where identity deepens beyond immediate kin into something more elastic and more guarded us and not us. Not as an ideology, not yet in any formal sense, but as an emotional boundary sharpened by uncertainty, shared warning, shared memory, shared root knowledge, shared fire habits, shared grief. All make the group feel like the only reliable structure inside an unreliable world. Outside it lie not only storms and predators, but other circles of trust that may defend themselves at your expense. And yet, even here, the human story refuses to become simple. The same capacity that makes other people threatening also makes them potentially transformative. New techniques, mates, language patterns, route information, access to distant stone, and alliances in difficult times may all move across these boundaries. Humans fear one another, and humans learn from one another. Sometimes both happen in the same encounter. That complexity belongs at the center of the story. The world becomes more dangerous when danger includes other humans, but it also becomes more social, more negotiable, more strategic, and perhaps more painfully ambiguous. So the camp watches the horizon differently now, not only for herd movement or weather change, but for smoke that is not theirs, tracks that do not match their own feet, broken brush too deliberate to belong to animals. The old fears remain cold: hunger, flood, darkness, predators. But layered over them is a newer one, sharper because it carries thought behind it. Somewhere beyond sight there may be others reading the same land, needing the same shelter, and seeing your presence as obstacle rather than kin. Once humans learn that, the world loses one more layer of innocence. Not even their own reflection, standing at a distance, can be trusted at first glance. By now the search for safety has become one of the central facts of human life. It is no longer enough to survive by movement alone, nor enough to trust memory without modification. Too much has changed. The weather turns without mercy. Hunger arrives out of season. Predators watch the edges. Other humans may appear where refuge narrows. The ground itself can fail. Under such conditions, safety stops being a lucky condition and becomes a problem to solve. The answer, at first, is never permanent. It comes in fragments: a cave with a better line of sight, a camp tucked above flood level, a windbreak improved with brush and hide, a fire positioned to guard both warmth and darkness, a sleeping arrangement that places the weakest inward and the most alert outward. These are not monuments. They are small acts of defiance against a world that has made its position clear. The cave is one of the oldest and most obvious examples, though even here the truth is more complicated than romantic images allow. To later minds, a cave suggests shelter, security, enclosure, permanence. In prehistory, a cave is better understood as a negotiation. It offers stone overhead, reduced exposure to wind and rain, thermal stability, defensible access, and often a fixed point in a shifting landscape. Those are enormous advantages. Yet caves also hold darkness, smoke, damp, narrow exits, hidden corners, disease risk, and the lingering or active presence of other animals. Many are used by carnivores as dens, temporary shelters, or scavenging sites. Some flood, some collapse, some trap cold air. Some are ideal for one season and miserable in another. What survives in the archaeological record makes this plain. Caves attract repeated occupation because they are useful, not because they are automatically safe. That distinction matters because it shows how human thinking is changing. Early on, the world is read largely as encountered. Now it is increasingly compared, evaluated, improved. A cave is not chosen simply because it exists. It is judged against alternatives. How narrow is the entrance? How far can one see from it? How close is water? Is there enough fuel nearby? Can children be kept away from steep drops? Is there evidence of recent predator use? Does smoke linger too heavily inside? Is the floor dry enough to sleep? Is there a second way out if something larger enters the first? Scholars still debate how far we can reconstruct such decision-making in fine detail, because the evidence remains incomplete and the material traces are often sparse. Yet no single explanation for repeated site choice makes sense without assuming that humans are selecting not just for convenience, but for risk management. This is true beyond caves as well. Open camps become more sophisticated in their placement. A slight rise above a drainage line can mean the difference between a wet, dangerous night and a survivable one. A line of trees can shield wind without giving too much cover to predators, if chosen correctly. A rocky shoulder can offer both visibility and backing. Access to water must be balanced against the danger of camping too near it. Fuel must be near enough to gather without waste, but not so dense that fire becomes a threat rather than a defense. Nothing is free. Every safer place carries a weakness, and every strong camp depends on recognizing that weakness before the world does. This may be one of the deepest prehistoric foundations of architecture. Long before architecture becomes a formal craft, humans begin arranging space deliberately to reduce harm. They clear sleeping areas. They cluster around the hearth with purpose. They use stone, brush, hide, poles, and whatever else the environment allows to interrupt wind, create edges, and define a controlled interior against an uncontrolled exterior. Most of these structures vanish completely from the record. That disappearance has often made the ancient world seem barer than it really was. Temporary shelters of hide, branch, reed, bone, turf, or packed debris can leave only ambiguous traces or none at all. Yet the absence of evidence should not mislead us into imagining passivity. A species that learns to hold fire, read danger, and remember roots almost certainly also learns to shape microenvironments continuously. The irony, however, is that every improvement in safety creates a new dependency. A better shelter ties people more closely to location. A cave reduces exposure, but it may attract repeated return. And repeated return can become vulnerability if conditions around the cave change or if another group claims it first. A well-placed camp with nearby fuel and water is ideal until drought shrinks the water. Predators begin using the same corridor, or rivals notice the same advantages. Built safety encourages investment, and investment makes loss more painful. The safer a place feels, the harder it becomes to abandon at the right moment. That may be one reason humans remain so mobile for so long even while improving camp structure. Mobility itself is a kind of shelter, not from weather in the simple sense, but from being trapped by attachment to one fragile solution. A group that can leave quickly may survive what a more rooted group cannot. Yet mobility has costs too. Children must be carried. Embers must be maintained or rekindled. Injured people slow the pace. Knowledge of the next destination may be incomplete. Food cannot always be stored long enough to support long movement. Safety, then, becomes a balance between staying in a place shaped for protection and retaining the ability to escape before that protection turns into a trap. This balance sharpens the importance of tools. Better cutting edges mean faster processing of hides, wood, meat, and plant fibers. Stronger points mean more secure hunting and defense. Containers, however simple, mean water and embers can be moved more reliably. Binding materials, hafting, and repeated tool maintenance all contribute to a world in which safety is not only found but assembled. What looks like technological progress from a distance may often have a more intimate motivation up close. A sharper flake is not merely ingenuity, it may mean a faster shelter, a better butchered carcass before scavengers arrive, a more effective defensive thrust in bad light, a cleaner way to cut bindings before a storm, a better chance of getting through the night. There is a lesser known but important connection here between shelter and social behavior. A safer place allows a group to concentrate attention differently. If wind is blocked, if fire is stable, if the perimeter is visible, more energy can be spent on repair, teaching, childcare, planning, and recovery from injury. Safety creates time, not much at first, not enough to erase hardship, but enough to widen what can be done beyond immediate crisis. This may help explain why some repeatedly occupied sites seem to preserve richer evidence of activity. Reduced exposure does not just save lives directly, it permits complexity indirectly. And yet the complexity remains fragile. Shelters can burn, roofing can fail, entrances can become choke points, smoke can sicken, stored fuel can run out, parasites and waste can accumulate where occupation persists too long. A defensible camp may also be harder to leave quickly. A cave that feels safe may hide unseen danger deeper inside. A valley camp protected from wind may become a cold trap at night. The evidence remains incomplete regarding how often such failures drove abandonment. But the principle is clear enough. Every human attempt to manufacture safety also manufactures new conditions for error. This is perhaps the most mature stage so far in the ancient realization that the world is unsafe. Earlier, humans learn that danger exists. Then they learn that it repeats unpredictably. Then they learn to remember and share warnings. Now they learn something more painful and more useful. Even well-made safety is conditional. No shelter solves all threats. No camp choice is beyond revision. No tool removes the need for attention. The world cannot be beaten once and for all. It must be managed every day. That daily management shapes the human mind in lasting ways. People become creatures who scan thresholds, inspect materials, prefer multiple exits, value dry ground, notice smoke direction, measure distance to water, and orient bodies in sleep according to exposure. Much of what later looks like simple common sense may descend from these repeated prehistoric calculations. Even modern homes still carry the echo's elevated foundations. Roofs against rain, walls against wind, hearths or their descendants at the centre, entries that can be watched, stored fuel or food, children kept inward, the vulnerable placed nearest help. Civilization elaborates these instincts. It does not invent them from nothing. There is also something more emotional at work. A better shelter does not merely reduce fear, it changes the quality of fear. Under open exposure, danger feels immediate and total. Inside a defensible camp, fear becomes more specific. Is the entrance secure? Is the fire stable? Did anyone hear movement outside? Is the weather turning in a way this shelter can handle? This is not freedom from anxiety. It is anxiety focused through design. Humans begin to live within spaces that are meant to protect them, and that very intention makes breaches feel sharper. Once safety has been built, its failure becomes psychologically louder. Children absorb this too. They learn not only the dangers outside, but the disciplines that keep a camp functioning, where embers belong, which materials burn too quickly, how to keep bedding dry, where sharp tools are placed, how not to block an exit, how to move in darkness without kicking apart what others depend on. Safety becomes culture in a more material sense now. It is built into layouts, habits, and maintenance routines. A careless child is not corrected merely for disorder. Disorder itself can become danger. This is where the first true sense of household may begin to emerge, not as property in the later legal sense, but as a zone of shared maintenance. Everyone contributes, whether by gathering fuel, carrying water, shaping points, preparing hides, tending children, watching the entrance, or feeding the fire. The safer place is not simply inhabited, it is constantly remade. That constant remaking may be one reason human beings become so attached to ordered space. Order is not aesthetic at first. It is defensive. Still, no amount of order can abolish fragility. The group knows this by now. They have seen camps erased, caves fail, routes disappear, resources move, people die in familiar places, so even in the best available shelter, confidence never becomes complete. The stronger the refuge, the more important it is to remain alert to the moment it stops being refuge. This may be one of the oldest forms of wisdom humans possess. Do not fall in love with a shelter so completely that you forget it is only a pause in a dangerous world. And yet pauses matter. A dry night matters. A defended fire matters. A cave that holds through storm matters. A camp that lets children sleep more deeply and adults wake with enough strength to hunt matters. These fragile successes are not trivial. They are the reason human life continues at all. The world is still unsafe, perhaps more obviously unsafe than ever, but now humans are not only learning from that fact, they are answering it with structure. So the camp settles into its chosen place with a seriousness earlier generations may not yet have needed in the same way. Stone is judged, ground is cleared, fire is positioned, bodies are arranged, tools are kept near, the entrance is watched, the wind is accounted for, children are brought inward, the weak are placed where hands can reach them quickly. Outside remains hunger, weather, predator, stranger, darkness, unstable earth. Inside there is only a temporary improvement. But it is improvement all the same. Humans have begun to do more than endure the unsafe world. They have begun, however cautiously, to build against it. Even after all of this, the exact turning point remains elusive. There is no single day preserved in stone when humanity wakes and decides the world is not safe. No bone carries that sentence. No ancient hearth records the moment in words. What we have instead are traces, patterns, pressures that overlap and reinforce one another across enormous spans of time. Climate shifts, predator pressure, failed migrations, dangerous darkness, fragile fire, collapse, flood, drought, intergroup rivalry. Childhood under uncertainty, shelters that help but never fully hold. The realization emerges not as a revelation delivered once, but as a cumulative adjustment in how humans move, remember, teach, and fear. That is why scholars still debate the turning point. The evidence is real, but it does not point to one clean answer. Some place the deepest cause in climate instability. This argument has force. Humans evolve across the Pleistocene, an age defined by oscillation, abrupt changes, advancing and retreating ice, shifting rainfall belts, expanding deserts, green corridors that open and close, prey ranges that move, coastlines that transform, and ecological mosaics that rarely sit still for long. In such a world, even a highly observant species cannot rely forever on fixed rules. What survives in paleoclimate records strongly suggests that repeated environmental unpredictability would have eroded any simple trust in local continuity. Seasons fail, familiar routes dry, productive ground becomes marginal. A refuge one generation depends upon may become unrecognizable in the next. By this view, humanity's deeper insecurity is not born first from claws or enemies, but from living in a planet-scale system whose rhythms can outrun inherited memory. There is much to support that. Climate has reach. It rearranges food, water, migration, disease, vegetation, visibility, and contact between groups all at once. It can make predators bolder, shelters less reliable, and human cooperation more strained without ever appearing in a dramatic form. A dry year can do more long-term damage than a visible attack. A cooling pulse can change movement patterns for generations. A rising shoreline can erase old landmarks and compress people into narrower habitable space. In this sense, climate instability is not just one threat among many. It is a multiplier, the broad background pressure that turns ordinary risks into chronic uncertainty. And yet climate alone does not fully explain the human experience of danger. The world may be unstable at large scales, but the body learns fear through immediate encounters. A child dragged at dusk, a flood that takes a known crossing, a cave roof collapse, a night of cold so severe that sleep becomes impossible. These are not abstractions, they are shocks. Some scholars therefore emphasize predators and direct environmental hazards as more foundational to human vigilance. This argument, too, has force. The nervous system responds most powerfully to immediate embodied threat. Long before people can infer slow ecological drift, they can feel the terror of being watched, exposed, or ambushed. Even if climate sets the stage, the actors entering that stage, lions, darkness, hunger, storm, unstable ground, are what carve caution deeply into behavior. This matters because human fear is not a single thing. It includes sudden alarm, prolonged watchfulness, memory-based avoidance, social caution, and the quieter expectation that bad outcomes remain possible even on ordinary days. Different pressures likely shape different parts of that spectrum. Predation may sharpen vigilance. Weather may widen respect for impersonal force. Hunger may teach the danger of absence. Intergroup rivalry may create social suspicion. Childhood dependence may make care more coordinated and fear more communal. No single explanation fully accounts for all of that because the human relationship to danger is layered, and each layer may have been built under somewhat different selective and cultural pressures. There is also the question of timing, and here uncertainty deepens. If by humans we mean the broader lineage of hominins, the realization must have roots far older than our own species. Earlier human relatives already navigate predator-rich landscapes, unstable resources, and exposed daily life. They already cooperate, carry young, choose camp, and leave evidence of selective site use. Some likely use fire, some almost certainly experience hunger, weather stress, and territorial overlap with others of their kind. In that wider sense, the unsafe world is ancient. It belongs not only to Homo sapiens but to a much deeper inheritance. If, however, we mean the moment when humans begin to internalize danger culturally, preserving it in stronger forms of memory, custom, planning, and perhaps symbolic behavior, then many scholars would look later. They might point to increasing evidence of complex social learning, broader diets, more flexible technology, longer distance movement, repeated occupation of advantageous sites, or eventually symbolic expression that hints at minds storing risk in more abstract forms. The evidence remains incomplete, and one must resist the temptation to turn complexity into a simple ladder. Still, it is plausible that as human cognition, language, and social organization deepen, the experience of danger becomes not just biological, but cultural in a richer sense. People do not merely react, they anticipate, ritualize, encode, and inherit. That distinction between biological caution and cultural insecurity is useful. A gazelle fears predators, a chimpanzee remembers dangerous encounters, but humans seem to do something more cumulative. They build a second world of remembered threat layered over the first. They transmit warnings about places, seasons, people, routes, and behaviors to individuals who never experienced the original danger. They may preserve caution long after the triggering event has passed. They may reorganize sleep, fire, childcare, and movement around lessons whose first cause has faded into the past. The turning point, then, may not be when humans first feel unsafe. It may be when they begin to live as though unsafety itself is a permanent condition requiring collective management. This interpretation helps explain why the archaeological record often looks like a story of repeated adjustment rather than singular transformation. We see shifts in toolkits, mobility, diet breadth, shelter use, site selection, perhaps symbolic marking of space or death. And eventually, much later, the full-scale construction of permanent environments designed to reduce uncertainty. None of these developments proves one grand psychological awakening, but together they suggest a species increasingly unwilling to leave survival to habit alone. Humans keep adding buffers, fire, better points, more careful site choice, broader food use, shared warnings, more structured care of the vulnerable. These are responses to many things, but all of them make sense in a world experienced as fundamentally unreliable. Some scholars push harder on social explanations. Perhaps the world begins to feel truly unsafe not when nature becomes hostile, but when human groups become dense, mobile, and overlapping enough that other people themselves become persistent risks. There is logic here too. Nature can be dangerous without being strategic. Rival humans force a different mental posture, one involving deception, concealed intention, alliance, betrayal, and contested ownership of refuge. Once danger can think back, insecurity takes on a more complex shape. This may become especially important later in prehistory, but its roots could be older wherever populations press against the same narrow ecological opportunities. A drought is terrible. A drought with competitors is worse in a qualitatively different way. Still, even this social view must be set within the older ecological one. Human conflict rarely floats free of environment. People collide over springs, hunting grounds, coastal shelves, caves, migration choke points, and fertile margins precisely because those places matter for survival. In that sense, the debate between environmental and social explanations may be partly false. The most persuasive picture is one of interaction. Climate stress reduces options. Reduced options increase overlap. Overlap increases tension. Tension makes movement riskier. Riskier movement heightens caution, strengthens group identity, and encourages better shelter, better tools, more guarded fire, and more urgent teaching of the young. The unsafe world emerges from systems colliding, not isolated causes. There is also the matter of human perception itself. Perhaps the turning point cannot be found solely in the external world, because part of it lies inside the maturing human mind. As cognition becomes more flexible, as memory lengthens, as communication improves, and as imagination grows more capable of simulating futures not yet lived, humans may become able to fear in new ways, not just the immediate predator or storm, but the possibility of failure tomorrow, next season, next migration. The ability to model danger ahead of time is one of humanity's greatest strengths. It may also be one of the oldest sources of unease. A species that can imagine disaster before it arrives will survive more often, but it will never again inhabit the present as innocently as a creature that cannot. This is difficult to prove directly, of course. Minds do not fossilize. Symbolic artifacts emerge late and ambiguously. We infer internal life from behavior, anatomy, comparison, and the slow build-up of cultural complexity. That inference must remain humble. Yet humility does not forbid strong conclusions where patterns converge, and one pattern converges everywhere. Human beings become increasingly organized around reducing exposure to an unpredictable world. They do not do this in one leap. They do not do it perfectly. They do it because repeated experience teaches that waiting passively is too expensive. A lesser-known complication in all of this is that safety itself may never have been a single universal standard. What counts as unsafe differs by landscape, season, age, skill, and social support. A rocky escarpment may feel dangerous to a family with small children and advantageous to skilled hunters using height and visibility. A cave may be refuge in winter and disease trap in damp seasons. A floodplain may be perilous for sleeping and ideal for gathering. Even other humans may be threat in one context and salvation in another. This means the turning point cannot be reduced to a fixed threshold in the environment alone. It is relational. The same world is experienced differently by different bodies and different groups. That insight may be why the debate remains unresolved, and perhaps must remain unresolved in part. The turning point is not a point, it is a widening recognition distributed across climates, generations, and human types. In some places, children likely grow up under danger so regular that caution feels ancient already. In others, older confidence lasts longer before drought, competition, or catastrophe shatters it. In still others, local abundance may buffer insecurity for a time even as fragility gathers beneath the surface. Human prehistory is too broad for one drama. It offers instead many converging awakenings. And yet, despite this uncertainty, the larger conclusion stands with unusual clarity. At some stage deep in the human past, perhaps many stages, people cease to meet danger as scattered events and begin treating the world itself as something that must be interpreted, anticipated, and managed collectively because it cannot be trusted to remain stable. That is the real turning point, whether it happened once or repeatedly. Not the first predator seen, not the first storm survived, not the first child lost, not the first fire kept through night, but the accumulation of all these into a new posture toward existence. By then, humans are no longer simply animals reacting to immediate hazard. They are creatures carrying the memory of hazard forward, embedding it in shelter, custom, route choice, child rearing, tool use, and the very architecture of attention. The world has taught them enough to change not just what they fear, but how they think. Scholars may continue debating which pressure mattered most, and rightly so. The evidence is fragmentary, the timelines overlap, and certainty would be dishonest. But the broad outline is difficult to deny. Somewhere across those long ages, humans stop assuming that skill alone can make the world cooperative. They begin to live as though danger is structural. And once that happens, the story is no longer only about surviving a hostile landscape. It becomes about becoming the kind of species that remembers hostility, plans around it, and passes that expectation forward. The turning point, then, is less a moment in time than a change in kind. Humans become the animal that does not just encounter the unsafe world. Humans become the animal that carries the unsafe world inside its own mind. Once fear becomes cumulative, it stops being only a reaction and starts becoming culture. This is one of the strangest and most important transformations in the human story. A predator can make a person run. A storm can make a group scatter or huddle. Hunger can force immediate choices about movement and food. But culture does something more lasting. It takes repeated danger and turns it into habits, meanings, expectations, and eventually stories that outlive the original event, in that sense. The unsafe world does not merely shape human bodies or camp choices. It seeps into the invisible architecture of thought. It begins to live in the way people organize attention, authority, cooperation, memory, and the interpretation of what cannot be fully controlled. At the most basic level, fear becomes culture through repetition. A path avoided for good reason becomes the path always avoided. A fire tended carefully because one disastrous lapse once burned bedding or scattered embers becomes a fire always tended by rule. Children are taught not to wander at dusk, not because every dusk brings attack, but because enough of them once did, or might. Bodies may be placed in particular ways, sleeping spaces arranged with predictable logic, tools kept near certain hands, and warnings attached to specific tones of voice. These things are not yet formal doctrines. They are ordinary life. That is precisely why they matter so much. The oldest culture may simply be repeated caution that has become normal enough to feel natural. Normality is powerful. Once a practice becomes normal, it no longer needs fresh justification in each generation. It only needs to keep working often enough. This is how fear hardens into inherited structure. A child does not have to witness the first fatal flood to learn that certain channels are abandoned when distant thunder sounds. A young hunter does not need to see someone dragged from reeds to understand why adults slow, scan, and cluster near certain water margins. The evidence remains incomplete on how particular customs emerged in deep prehistory, and it would be careless to project later fully developed symbolic systems too far backward. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for the durability of human caution unless one allows that repeated danger becomes encoded in practice long before it is ever encoded in writing. From there the process deepens. Once a behavior is repeated enough, it begins to attract meaning beyond immediate utility. The fire is no longer just hot, it is central. The perimeter is no longer just an edge, it is the boundary between known and unknown, between inside and outside, between those whose reactions can be trusted and those whose intentions cannot yet be read. Night is not only dark, it becomes a time that carries expectation, seriousness, and perhaps eventually special forms of speech, silence or watchfulness. Places where death recurs become more than dangerous. They become marked in collective feeling, a cave mouth, a crossing, a ridge. A grove may acquire an atmosphere before it acquires a story, and eventually story will follow. This is where myth, in the broadest sense, may begin to gather its earliest roots, not mythology as later civilizations write it, with formal gods, lineages, and sacred texts, but the simpler human tendency to preserve truth inside memorable form. A warning repeated as plain instruction works well enough. A warning attached to a vivid narrative works longer. Do not go to that river bend at dusk because someone was taken there last dry season. Then, later, because the bend is where danger waits. Later still, perhaps, because that is the place where one must behave differently from other places. Scholars still debate how far symbolic thought, ritual marking, and narrative explanation extend into different layers of prehistory. The archaeological record is fragmentary, and not every repeated practice implies myth. But the direction of pressure is clear. Human beings preserve costly lessons best when those lessons are embedded in attention-grabbing form. Fear also shapes cooperation in a way that becomes cultural rather than merely situational. Earlier, cooperation is necessary because no single person can watch, hunt, gather, carry children, tend fire, and survive alone for long in a hostile environment. Over time, however, this necessity becomes expectation. The group does not merely happen to share labor. It is supposed to. One keeps watch because that is what responsible people do. One returns with warning because withholding warning threatens everyone. One contributes fuel, repairs shelter, minds the children, or assists the wounded because the safer world inside camp depends on such acts being ordinary rather than exceptional. The beginning of duty may lie here, in the simple fact that fear is easier to endure when distributed and deadlier when ignored. Authority, too, may deepen under these conditions, not authority in the later institutional sense, but the practical weight carried by those who are better at reading danger, remembering bad seasons, choosing camp, judging strangers, or deciding when a refuge has become too risky to hold. A group living under chronic uncertainty cannot let every major decision be random. Someone's judgment will matter more. Perhaps it is the elder who recalls the longest drought. Perhaps the best tracker who notices what others miss. Perhaps the person most skilled at fire, or the one whose calm during storms keeps others from wasting effort. Leadership may first solidify not around prestige alone, but around competence under threat. The unsafe world rewards those who can correctly say no, not only those who can courageously say yes. There is a darker side to this cultural inheritance. Once fear becomes embedded, it can outlast the danger that created it. A place once unsafe may remain burdened with caution after conditions shift. An encounter with strangers that ended badly may foster suspicion that later blocks beneficial contact. A food avoided in one deadly season may remain shunned longer than necessary. The nervous system and the group alike prefer to preserve false alarms over fatal openness. In that sense, culture is protective but also conservative. It saves by remembering, and it sometimes distorts by remembering too well. This tension may be ancient. Humans need tradition because the world is dangerous, and humans are burdened by tradition because the world changes. That burden may help explain why culture is never static even when fear is constant. New conditions force revision. A valley once avoided may become necessary in severe drought. A rival group may become ally when predators or scarcity intensify. A shelter once trusted may be abandoned after collapse. A new tool or fire practice may reduce dangers older generations accepted as inevitable. In this way, culture becomes a running argument between memory and adaptation. Too much memory and the group becomes rigid, too little and it pays for forgotten lessons with fresh dead. The human solution is imperfect, but it is powerful. Preserve much, revise enough. Lesser-known evidence from later traditional societies, used carefully and not as a direct mirror, shows how often practical survival knowledge is wrapped inside story, taboo, etiquette, or ritual timing. Dangerous coasts, floodplains, animal behaviors, weather signs, poisonous species, and contested spaces are frequently managed not only with direct instruction, but with patterned behavior carrying emotional force. Deep prehistory almost certainly had its own versions, though we can rarely see them clearly. Still, the principle is persuasive. Information that matters for survival tends to be remembered best when it is socially charged. Fear gives charge to memory. Culture gives memory a container. The emotional consequences are profound. A people shaped by repeated danger does not simply become nervous. It becomes interpretive. Every unusual sound, track, sky color, silence, wind shift, animal movement, or stranger's posture enters a field of possible meaning. This is not superstition in any cheap sense. It is the disciplined imagination of a species trying to stay ahead of the next bad surprise. Some of those interpretations will be wrong, some will be life-saving. The point is not perfection. The point is that the mind no longer treats the world as self-explanatory. It treats it as coded. From that grows a deeper kind of human seriousness, not constant solemnity, because laughter, affection, rest, and even play continue wherever people survive long enough to have them. But an underlying awareness that routine depends on vigilance. To later urban minds, routine can feel like the absence of danger. To early humans, routine may often mean danger successfully managed for another day. The hearth is calm because someone fed it. The children sleep because someone watched the perimeter. The camp remains in place because someone judged weather, water, predators, and perhaps neighboring groups correctly. Peace itself becomes recognized, even if not explicitly, as something maintained rather than given. This may also be where moral emotions deepen in a distinctively human way. Gratitude toward those who warn, anger toward the careless, trust in the reliable, shame attached to failures that expose others, admiration for steadiness under pressure. All of these make sense in a life where the group buffers a dangerous world. One could imagine the earliest strong moral reputations forming around survival competence. The one who abandons others at the wrong moment, wastes food in scarcity, neglects the fire, lies about danger signs, or leads children toward a risk is not merely foolish. They threaten the social shield. Conversely, the one who notices first, shares first, returns for the weak, or keeps calm in storm becomes disproportionately valuable. Culture remembers these differences, and then fear becomes more than a response to the outside. It becomes part of identity. A group knows itself partly through the dangers it has learned to survive. These people know how to cross bad ground, read certain skies, manage certain predators, endure certain winters, approach strangers in a certain way, and bury or leave their dead according to lessons bought over generations. Another group elsewhere may know another set of dangers better. This does not yet produce nation or tribe in any later formal sense, but it does create distinct ways of being human in relation to specific landscapes. Culture, then, is not just shared meaning. It is localized survival refined into habit and pride. What emerges from all this is a strange inheritance. Humans become the animal that can turn fear into order, not perfect order, never total security, but enough structure that the next generation does not start from zero. A child enters a world already arranged by prior alarm. Fire placement, sleeping patterns, taboo places, cautious routes, tones of command, food sharing, leadership, childcare, stranger reading. All of it is waiting. In that sense, culture is one of the great shelters humans build without stone walls. It is portable. It survives movement. It survives after camps are abandoned and routes shift. It can even survive after the original landscape is lost, because the habits of caution travel with the bodies that learned them. This is why fear becomes so enduring. It is no longer attached only to immediate threat. It has been transformed into expectation, custom, and shared interpretation. The world is not safe, but humans have found a way to live inside that knowledge without collapsing under it. They remember danger. They ritualize against it. They cooperate because of it. They build meaning around it. They teach it until it feels like common sense. And in doing so, they create something unmistakably human, a culture shaped not only by what the world gives, but by what the world has repeatedly taken away. So as night falls over the camp and the old routines gather everyone inward, one sees more than a cluster of bodies surviving another evening. One sees a whole invisible structure holding them together. Fire tended a certain way. Children placed where hands can reach. Silence at the edge. Warnings carried in tone more than words. Paths not taken. Places remembered. Trust distributed carefully. Attention sharpened by generations no longer present. The dangerous world has not been defeated. It has been absorbed, organized, and carried forward until fear itself becomes one of the foundations of human culture. All of that ancient learning remains with us, even now, though it no longer wears the same landscape. The caves have become apartments, towers, farmhouses, engines, bunkers, suburbs, heated rooms, sealed windows, lit roads, and doors that lock. Fire has become electricity, gas, grids, furnaces, stoves, and networks so vast that most people never see the source of the warmth or light they depend upon. Predators no longer wait at every waterhole in most human worlds. Floodplains have levees. Storms have forecasts. Food crosses continents. Children sleep behind walls. Yet the old structure of feeling does not vanish simply because the environment changes. It adapts, as it always has. The body remembers what the city has forgotten. This is one of the strangest truths in human history. We live farther from immediate danger than most of our ancestors could have imagined. And yet we remain built for danger deeply enough that safety itself often feels provisional. A sudden sound at night still sharpens attention before thought catches up. Strange footsteps behind us alter the body long before the mind has judged whether fear is justified. High places still pull and unsettle. Darkness still changes perception. Isolation still makes many people uneasy. We scan rooms for exits without announcing that we're doing so. We check weather forecasts compulsively. We store food, lock doors, watch children near water, distrust sudden silence, and feel relief when the familiar glow of home appears after distance or storm. Civilization has not erased these habits. It has simply given them new objects. That continuity does not mean modern fear is identical to prehistoric fear. It is not. Much of what terrifies people now is mediated through institutions, technology, information, and forms of abstraction ancient humans could never have conceived. A broken food chain, a failing state, a disease no eye can see, a climate system altered by industrial force, financial collapse, war carried over unimaginable distance. These belong to another scale of existence. But what is striking is how often modern systems still touch the same ancient nerves. Scarcity, exposure, rival groups, unreadable strangers, sudden environmental shift, children at risk, night, fire, flood. The categories remain recognizable even when their form changes. In that sense, the inheritance is not merely biological, it is cultural in the deepest possible way. Human societies still organize themselves around reducing uncertainty, insurance, storage, walls, laws, calendars, police, architecture, agriculture, medicine, maps, weather science, supply chains, surveillance, emergency planning. All of it can be understood as the grand expansion of a prehistoric project that begins with embers, remembered crossings, and the placement of sleeping bodies around a fire. We're still trying to do the same thing our ancestors did in far harsher conditions. We're still trying to make tomorrow less dangerous than it would be if left alone. There is even something haunting in how much effort this still requires. Despite all modern power, safety remains conditional. One storm can still erase roads. One blackout can make a city suddenly feel older than it should. One failed harvest in the wrong system can ripple through distant markets. One flood can remind people that rivers have long memories. One war can return the human stranger to the category of mortal threat with terrifying speed. One pandemic can make bodies remember contagion without understanding it any better emotionally for having scientific explanation. The evidence is no longer carved in bone and scattered camp remains. It flashes in headlines, insurance losses, migration patterns, hospital corridors, and anxious sleep. This is why the ancient realization matters. The day humans understood the world was not safe is not only a prehistoric episode buried somewhere in deep time, it is a condition we continue to inhabit, though filtered through technology and institutions that sometimes conceal it from us. Our ancestors learned that survival depends on reading instability, sharing warnings, carrying memory, building shelters, revising habits, and protecting the vulnerable within a larger uncertainty. We're still doing that. We do it with satellites and sensors now, with concrete, law, refrigeration, vaccines, and data. But the structure is familiar. The world remains something to interpret, not merely occupy. What may be most enduring of all is the emotional paradox left behind by those ancient lives. Humans are extraordinarily adaptive because they never fully trust the ground beneath their adaptations. That lack of trust is exhausting. It is also one of the reasons we are here. A species too relaxed in the face of repeated danger would not have lasted long. A species unable to rest at all would have collapsed under its own vigilance. Human beings survive by balancing those two impossible needs. Enough fear to prepare, enough calm to continue. That balance may be the real inheritance from the deep past. And perhaps this is why the modern world, for all its protections, still produces a special ache when systems fail. It is not only inconvenience, it is recognition. The lights go out, the flood rises, the roads close, the shelves thin, communication breaks. And suddenly, beneath the modern surface, something much older stirs. People cluster, count supplies, watch the weather, guard the children, seek trustworthy company, and measure the night differently. For a moment, the old animal returns, not because civilization disappears, but because civilization has always been a thin, brilliant answer to a much older question. The ancient humans who learned this lesson had no final solution. They found fire and still feared the dark beyond it. They found shelter and still knew stone could fall. They remembered dangerous places and still had to cross new ground. They taught caution to their children and still lost some of them. They formed groups for protection and still met danger in the shape of other groups. The world gave them no permanent treaty. It offered only intervals, seasons, chances, and the possibility that careful attention might hold disaster back for one more day. That was enough. Not enough for certainty, but enough for continuity. What survives from them, then, is not simply fear. It is the discipline built around fear, the practice of watching, teaching, repairing, storing, warning, arranging, and revising. The refusal to treat safety as natural, the instinct to gather inward when risk rises, the need to turn memory into structure so that the next generation need not begin defenseless. In some of our best moments, this inheritance becomes wisdom rather than panic. It becomes preparedness, compassion, and a seriousness about fragile things. In our worst moments, it curdles into suspicion, hoarding, cruelty, and the belief that only one circle can survive. The old lesson cuts both ways because it was learned in a hard world. Still, the larger legacy is impossible to miss. Human civilization is, in one sense, the longest sustained attempt ever made to answer the unsafe world with design. Every roof, law, granary, seawall, clinic, warning system, archive, road, and bedtime story carries some shadow of that beginning. We are the descendants of creatures who learned too well that the world could shift under them, and so they devoted themselves to building patterns strong enough to outlast at least some of its moods. They were never fully safe. We are not fully safe now, but because they noticed, remembered, and changed, the space between danger and survival grew just wide enough for history to happen. So the final image is not of victory. It is something more human than that. A small band in gathering dark, fire held carefully against wind, children drawn inward, adults listening beyond the light, the land around them beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to trust completely. And inside that circle, already, the thing that will one day become everything else shared memory arranged into shelter, that is the inheritance still with us. Not the illusion that the world became safe, but the older, steadier knowledge that because it did not, humans learned to build one fragile layer of safety after another, and to call that labor civilization now. Word count 1639. The night is older than memory, and so is the human habit of answering it with a little light. Long before walls, before fields, before roads and names and kingdoms and written warnings, there are people gathered against the dark, trying to hold a small order together while the larger world presses at the edges. That may be the quiet center of the whole story. Not conquest, not certainty, not a final triumph over danger, only this repeated act of making a livable space inside what cannot be fully controlled. The world our ancestors knew was beautiful, but beauty offered no protection. Grasslands opened under wide skies and still concealed hunger. Rivers glittered and still rose without mercy. Mountains gave shelter and stone and still broke apart. Forests fed and hid and threatened. Even the familiar places could turn strange. That was the hardest lesson of all. Danger was not always elsewhere. Sometimes it lived inside the ordinary, waiting for the season to shift, the herd to fail, the rain to come too hard, the ground to move, the stranger to appear, the fire to die down. And still they stayed human inside it. They watched over children. They remembered old losses. They taught one another where not to stand, when not to cross, how to read the sky, how to guard the embers, how to listen when the birds went suddenly quiet. They carried the past forward in habits so small they would leave almost nothing behind for us to find. A route avoided, a sleeping place chosen carefully, a body turned toward the entrance, a warning given in time. These are fragile things. Easy to miss in the scale of history, but history is built from them all the same. Perhaps that is why the past lingers so powerfully in us. Not because we are trapped in ancient fear, but because we are shaped by ancient vigilance. We still gather inward when uncertainty rises. We still feel relief at shelter, warmth, familiar voices, and enough stored away for tomorrow. We still understand, somewhere below language, that safety is rarely a gift. It is usually work, it is arrangement, it is memory turned practical, it is care made visible. So when we look back across prehistory, what we see is not simply a harsher world than our own. We see the beginnings of one of the oldest human arts, the art of making life possible in a place that offers no guarantees. That art begins in darkness, in weather, in hunger, in the first shared warnings, in the first held fire, in the first child drawn close because something in the landscape did not feel right. It continues still, in forms our ancestors would never recognize and yet would understand at once. And maybe that is the final image to leave undisturbed. Not the catastrophe, not the predator, not the broken ground, but the circle that forms afterward. The small human circle, faces lit by uncertain light. Beyond it, distance. Beyond that, night. And within it, the stubborn decision to remember, to protect, to teach, and to begin again before morning.